Chapter 508. Saint. Dean was startled. Is it Aisha's sister? While he was deep in thought, a faint fragrance wafted over from the dark prison cell. It did not smell like any perfume or rouge. Following, it was a slender and graceful figure, carrying a huge sword on her back. When they saw her face, both of them were stunned and blurted out almost in unison, "It's you." Aisha was surprised to see Dean curled up in the cage. She had a good memory since childhood. At a glance, she recognized the boy that she had met once. Moreover, the situation of that meeting was a bit special. It left a deep impression on her. At this moment, she never thought that the boy who was framed by her sister and sent to the orphanage would be the one she met last time when they were hunting the Splitter. Dean was also surprised, as he didn't expect to meet the girl who had killed the Splitter here. Many doubts in his heart were instantly answered. Aisha had said that her sister could hunt monsters within level 100. But this girl could easily defeat the Splitter last time, although the Splitter had just laid eggs and was injured by him. But it was a legendary monster. There is a world of difference between a legendary monster and an ordinary monster at the same hunting level. In short, both of them were level 20 monsters. But a legendary monster could easily kill an ordinary monster. But a legendary monster was far beyond the hunting level defined in the Monster Atlas. For example, the legendary Splitter, which was level 68, was not inferior to an ordinary monster, which was level 100. It was obvious that she was Aisha's bad sister, since she had such strength and was a member of the Dragon Clan. Of course, he wouldn't believe Aisha's nonsense now that he was in such a situation. "Are you Haley?" Dean asked. Aisha was surprised. She shook her head. "I'm Aisha. The person who is in contact with you is my sister Haley." "Are you Aisha?" Dean was startled. No wonder she didn't worry that I would confess to her when she caught me. It's because I would only confess to Aisha. Sure enough, she's calculated everything, including my resistance. She's going to make use of everything. Thinking of this, all the mysteries in his heart were solved. When Hathaway saw his handkerchief, she recognized it as her sister's. So she used him and pretended to be her sister to get in touch with him. The first time they met, she invited him to join the Dragon Clan. She tried to let him enter the inner wall. It was obvious that if he agreed, then she would take him to a forbidden area of the Dragon Clan. At that time, the dragons would inevitably arrest him and investigate him in detail. Then they would follow the clues and point the spearhead to Aisha. But at that time, he refused. Moreover, he had become suspicious at that time, and Hathaway had probably seen through this. Hence, when they met again, she wasn't as impatient as the first time. She didn't confess and invite him. Instead, she chose another method, which was to provide him with the god's marrow. First, she gave him god's marrows to win his favor. The third time they met, she gave him the secretary of the Dragon Clan. The fourth time, she used the evidence to arrest him and frame the real Aisha. In a flash, Dean understood the whole story and the conspiracy process behind it. When Hathaway had sat on the ruins of the high-rise building and talked about her sister, she was vicious. Now it seemed that she had added emotional factors into it. Most of the elements were smearing the reputation of her sister. He was startled as he thought of this. He looked at Aisha. "The person who gave me the handkerchief is you?" Hearing Dean mention the handkerchief, the surprise in Aisha's eyes quickly disappeared. She couldn't help but carefully look at Dean. She was convinced that this was the little boy she had brought to the orphanage. After all, although there were black-haired and black-eyed bloodlines, there were not many of them. Most of them had brown hair and brown eyes. Moreover, she had only given the handkerchief to one person. "Are you the child who was wandering in the street in the heavy rain?" Aisha stared at him, even though she was convinced in her heart. There was a trace of strange feeling in Dean's heart when he heard a girl who was only 1 or 2 years older than him call him a child. But he had suffered a loss before. Although he was convinced that his guess was not far from the truth, he decided to carefully ask again. "Do you remember the situation at that time?" He didn't ask Haley directly, but he asked her indirectly. But she said that she didn't remember. Such an answer was reasonable at that time. After all, it was 8 or 9 years ago, so it was normal that she didn't remember. The night was dark, and it was raining heavily. As soon as Aisha heard Dean's question, She knew that he had suffered because of her sister. She wanted to confirm his identity. She couldn't help but recall that night. It was the first night she climbed over the wall and left a deep impression. At that time, you were walking on the street, wearing strange clothes. Your face was very pale, like a bloodless corpse. I saw your whole body was wet. The rain was too lethal for ordinary people like you, so I took you to a shack to take shelter from the rain. Dean was stunned. When he heard her say that he was wearing a strange outfit, he was already convinced that this was the cute little girl who brought him to the orphanage. At that time, his body was weak, and he almost fell down. She was the one who supported him all the way. Thinking of this, his eyes suddenly surged with warmth, but in the next moment, it was followed by a chill from head to toe. Aisha's eyes narrowed as she saw Dean's face suddenly turn pale. She stepped forward and said, "What's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? I see that your body temperature is very low. I'm sorry." Dean didn't seem to hear her words. He lowered his eyes and clenched his fists tightly. "I hurt you, He rarely blamed himself, but this time he felt a strong sense of guilt from the bottom of his heart. This sense of guilt twisted his heart into a ball, as if his body was being strangled, making it difficult for him to breathe. The reason why he wore the handkerchief was that he hoped that if he met the little girl again in the future, he could return her kindness. However, not only did he not return this kindness to her, but he also hurt her again. Although he knew that the main cause of this incident was Hathaway's plan, and his hatred and killing intent towards her were the same thing, it was an unavoidable fact that he had fallen into her trap. He wouldn't completely vent his anger on her, but he regretted that he didn't listen to his intuition when he noticed that something was strange, but was swayed by his own feelings. Seeing Dean's painful look, Aisha was slightly startled. She didn't expect that this person, whom she had only met twice, would blame himself for this matter. There was a trace of apology in her heart, and she whispered, "I'm the one who should say sorry. If I hadn't indulged her for so many years, she wouldn't have done such a thing. She just wanted to deal with me, but she got you involved. It's me who implicated you." Dean still lowered his head, slightly shook his head, and said in a hoarse voice, "If I could be more sensitive, I wouldn't have fallen into her trap, and there wouldn't be today's situation. Not only did I let myself fall into such a situation, but I also hurt you. This is a failure, a fatal failure. If I could be more rational, trust my intuition, and hold the attitude of I would rather kill the wrong person than let go, I wouldn't have been deceived by her." Aisha suddenly felt that there was a stubbornness in this boy, a lonely stubbornness. Her eyes flashed slightly, and her cheeks softened a bit. "That's right, but you believed her because you thought she was me, so you didn't guard against her." Hearing her comforting words, Dean knew that she was right. This time, he wasn't rational enough. He didn't listen to his intuition several times, but was swayed by his subjective feelings. This made the pain and hatred in his heart stronger, and at the same time, there was a trace of confusion. He didn't hate Haley, but himself. A kind person will be gullible to others. A bad person will be ruthless when dealing with others, and would rather kill the wrong person than let go. But for familiar people, close friends, relatives, lovers, if because of a little suspicion they would rather kill the wrong person than let go, then what kind of person are they? Or are they still human? But if I don't, how many people will pretend to be my relatives, friends, and stab me when I'm least prepared? He thought of Crone who betrayed him, Jenny's father who framed him, and Haley's disguise. If he was just an ordinary person, then perhaps he wouldn't encounter all these things. But he had come this far and couldn't return to ordinary life. Even if he could be an ordinary person, how could he be willing? How could he stop because of the fear of encountering these things again? Chapter 509. Aisha's lips slightly moved as she saw Dean's depressed look. You don't have to blame yourself for anything. She was deliberately using you. It would be strange if you were aware of it. Moreover, I should thank you for this matter. Thank you for letting me get rid of the identity of a saint. I can live freely like others. Dean was startled as he looked up at her. I was born with awakened ability. I have been given high expectations since childhood. I have been undergoing rigorous training since I can remember. There was a faint smile hanging on Aisha's mouth. There was a bit of reminiscence in her eyes. Day after day of training, learning, fighting. I'm like a puppet that exists to kill. Today, finally, this shackle no longer shackles me. So, I really want to thank you. She stared at Dean with a serious expression. Dean was startled. He didn't expect that a girl who was a little older than him would lead such a boring and monotonous life. This matter is a good thing for me, but Aisha looked at Dean with a trace of apology in her eyes. I'm really sorry for involving you in this matter. You almost lost your life. Dean's mouth slightly moved as he shook his head. It's not you who should say sorry. Moreover, I'm used to such things. He had been inexplicably involved in several crises in the past and almost lost his life. He still remembered the physical examination when he entered the school. The radiation value in his blood had reached the standard, and he was taken to the hunter's constitution test. He almost lost his life because two hunters were talking to each other. Later, he was framed by Jenny's father because he liked Jenny's daughter. Including this time, because of the fight between Aisha and Hathaway, he was involved in it and almost lost his life. The reasons for these dangers were comical and laughable to him, but this was the true nature of this world. The root cause was that he was too weak. The weak were always out of control of their own lives. Hunters were like this, and so were ordinary people. A diligent worker may lose his position and source of income because of the arrival of the superior's relatives. An excellent soldier could lose his life because of a bad bet made by an officer. As the saying goes, my fate is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens, and man can conquer nature. Was the heaven here referring to the emotionless dead thing that overlooked all living beings and turned a blind eye to countless injustices and sufferings? The real heaven referred to people like the Son of Heaven in ancient times, who stood at the highest point. Only humans could decide the life and death of others, and they could also make others wish they were dead. Aisha was silent for a moment after hearing Dean's words. You'll have a hard time in the future. I hope you can stick to it. If there is a chance, I will apply to the Patriarch to let you return to your original life. From now on. Dean was startled. You mean, your dragon clan won't execute me? Haishan nodded. I have already told the Patriarch that he will keep you alive. But based on my understanding of him, he should transfer you to the Dragon Guards and use you as a waste. Recycling? Dean's mouth twitched as he heard her blunt words. But as long as he could live, it didn't matter if he was treated as waste by the Dragon Clan. So what if he was used as waste? However, listening to Aisha's tone, the Dragon Guards didn't seem to be a good job. He asked, what does the Dragon Guards do? Does it have anything to do with the wasteland? There was a trace of surprise in Aisha's eyes. She didn't expect Dean to know the existence of the wasteland, but she quickly thought of her sister Hathaway and understood. She nodded. Yes, the responsibility of the Dragon Guards is to assist the pioneers to clean up the monsters in the outer edge of the wasteland. It is similar to the hunters in the outer wall, but the monsters they encounter are much stronger and the mortality rate is higher. Dean was startled and suddenly understood. No wonder they were used as waste. Their work outside the wall could be sacrificed at any time. However, it was normal for the Dragon Clan to do so. When he was caught here, he didn't think that he could survive or leave easily. After all, he had obtained the secret fighting scroll of the Dragon Clan. If he let him go, wouldn't it be the same as leaking the secret fighting techniques of the Dragon Clan? It didn't matter if he was sent to be the Dragon Guards, even if he was sacrificed. It was indeed recycling. Fortunately, I can still live. Dean wasn't worried. Instead, he was secretly glad. Aisha saw that Dean was startled and didn't speak. You don't have to worry. Although you will be a Dragon Guard, it won't be difficult to survive as long as you are careful. Moreover, the family will give you God's marrows and fighting techniques to improve your combat effectiveness. It will allow you to reach the basic standard of the Dragon Guards, which is the level of Senior Limitless. Dean nodded slightly, but he wasn't too happy in his heart. After all, God's marrows were dead things. In the eyes of the Dragon Clan, they were just some materials. These materials were given to him to improve his combat effectiveness. They also hoped that he could better complete the tasks of the Dragon Guards. After all, even if it was a waste, it had to be used to make good use of it. What are your magic marks? Aisha asked. Dean glanced at her, his mind turning. Aisha saw the subtle changes in his face as he was about to tell a lie. She knew that she had touched the privacy of others. She immediately changed her words. Is it a rare level? If not, I can provide you with a good rare level magic mark so that your survivability can be improved. After all, you were involved in this matter because of me. I'm the one who harmed you. Dudian knew her intention when he heard her question. He shook his head. I would have died if it wasn't for you. This should be the second time you saved me. Aisha shook her head. You wouldn't have encountered such danger if it wasn't for me. Dudian deeply looked at her, but didn't say anything. He knew that it would be difficult to repay the girl's help. After the incident with Hathaway, he was clear that before he became strong enough, he would only harm himself and others if he tried to repay the kindness of others. Do you need to replace your rare magic marks? Aisha said, I have Steel Dragon, Devourer, Black Weaver, and Silicon Rock in my hands. They are all rare magic marks with strong life-saving properties. Dudian could see that she really wanted to help him. However, the girl's expression was always flat when she spoke. It seemed that she didn't know how to get along with people. He shook his head. No, I'm used to it. I'm not used to replacing it with other magic marks. You have helped me enough. I can survive this time because of you. He wanted to say that he would repay her if he had a chance in the future, but he didn't say it. It was meaningless to say it. After all, she didn't expect him to repay her for what she had done for him. Yes, Aisha nodded. The magic marks are the most suitable for you. In that case, you should stick to it. Dudian nodded. Aisha didn't say anything more. She looked at him meaningfully and turned to leave the cell. Dudian looked at her back through the bars of the cell. He slowly retracted his gaze. His depressed mood was filled with hope again. But suddenly he thought of one thing. Aisha's sanest identity had been replaced by the previous Haley. Now that she had the sanest identity, she had greater power. Would she continue to frame him in the future? Did he really only need to be a good Dragon Desolate guard and survive? He didn't think that this woman would give up. Moreover, he could infer a lot of things from the previous conversation on the ruins of the high-rise building. Although this woman had been deceiving him from beginning to end, some of the things she said might not be lies. After all, a real lie should always be half true so that people would believe it. One thing could be confirmed from Haley's words. That Aisha, who gave him the handkerchief and took him to the orphanage, really didn't have any friends. Although he was in the cell and couldn't see the whole picture, but he could judge from a person's words and expression. Combined with Haley's previous words, he could basically conclude. This seemed to be useless information, but Dudian understood that it was extremely dangerous. If Aisha didn't have any friends, then he would be used by Hathaway once again due to the relationship between them. Unless she suddenly softened and was satisfied with the sanest identity and wouldn't deal with Aisha again. However, according to Dudian's previous chat with her, the practices of the bad sister Haley were a great degree of discrediting. This represented a strong hatred. This kind of hatred might not be satisfied by pulling the other party down from the altar. It seems that there will be a lot of trouble in the future. Dudian's eyes turned gloomy. Staying in the Dragon Clan wasn't a long-term solution. He must find a way to leave as soon as possible and produce his own invention. Only then would he have the power to protect himself. However, the production of the invention would take at least 3 to 5 months. Moreover, with his current sensitive identity, would the Dragon Clan let him leave easily? Obviously not. Dudian wrinkled his brows as he thought about all kinds of possibilities. Time flew. Half a day after Aisha left, a voice came from the cell again. Dean was sitting cross-legged in the cell. He was thinking about his own things. But when the cell door opened, he came back to his senses. Although he didn't look up, he saw a figure coming from outside the cell. It was the blonde youth who had gone with Haley to arrest him outside the giant wall. Cyrus looked at Dudian in the dark cell. He ordered the jailer, open the door. The jailer had already seen the handwritten order he had brought, so he opened the cage, as instructed. Dudian slowly stood up. Come out, the elder wants to see you. Cyrus frowned as he spoke quickly. He closed his mouth and stopped breathing because the smell in the cell was too disgusting. Dudian's eyes lit up as he nodded and stepped out of the cell. Cyrus turned around and left. Dudian followed him. There was a low-lying valley outside the cell. It was surrounded by thorns and strange flowers. The flowers were brightly colored and were famous poisonous plants in the Flora Atlas. Cyrus didn't say a word as he walked in front of Cyrus. Dean followed closely behind, not squinting, but secretly carefully observing the surroundings. Anyway, walking like this was the same as walking, and at the same time memorizing the route. There will always be some harvest. Although it may not be used in the future, but there is always a chance in life, right? It didn't take long for Dudian to follow Cyrus to reach a high peak. There was a castle here. It covered a large area and looked magnificent. There was a square outside the castle. There were some giant stone sculptures on the square. They seemed to be the ancestors of the dragon clan. Dragon guards wearing standard armor were standing in the corridors outside the castle. Although there was no one around, they were still standing upright and had an imposing appearance. Cyrus led Dudian to the main hall of the castle. There was a bright red carpet spread all the way to the door. It was spacious and tall. It looked like a huge church, but there were no rows of chairs or podium. There was only a bronze throne. A burly man was sitting on it. He was wearing a vest-like armor. His shoulders and arms were dark and full of muscles. On his lower body, he wore loose brown pants that looked like a butcher's and a pair of boots with alloy soles. However, the most eye-catching thing was on his back. There were actually 2 spikes protruding from his back, pressing against the throne behind him. They looked like the spikes on the back of a lizard, one long and one short. The long one was more than 20 centimeters, while the short one was more than 10 centimeters. They looked extremely terrifying. Dudian was shocked as he looked at the man from afar. The man's body was extremely hot, like a burning fireball. It was almost comparable to Haley's. However, she was much inferior to Aisha, whom he had seen in the prison cell. The heat on Aisha's body was restrained, like a mass of dark red blood flowing in her body. Although people couldn't distinguish the specific heat density, they could roughly feel some of the intensity. It was several times stronger than this person. But this man's heat was very easy to see. It was completely released, as if he was in the most excited state. Is this also a pioneer level? Dudian's eyes flashed. The Dragon Clan was really strong. He just met a random person who had such terrifying strength. Moreover, according to the blonde youth, he was just an elder and not a patriarch. Elder Harlika, this is the outsider who got the Dragon Thorn chapter, Cyrus respectfully said. Harlika raised his dark golden eyes and looked at Dudian. The golden streamers in his eyes seemed to divide Dudian. He said in a rough and hoarse voice, "You go back." "Yes." Cyrus respectfully nodded and quickly turned away. He didn't want to stay in front of this monster for a moment. Harlika looked at Dudian after Cyrus left. "You come over." Dudian felt hostility from Harlika. Did Haley's revenge start so soon? Is this elder one of her people? With that in mind, he slowly took a few steps forward. Harlika saw that Dudian was walking very slowly. It seemed that he didn't dare to step forward. He coldly snorted, "Black-haired boy, do you know how badly you have harmed Her Royal Highness Aisha?" Dudian was startled but relieved at the same time. It seemed that this person wasn't one of Haley's people. Harlika snorted as he saw Dudian. Her Royal Highness Aisha has been conscientiously guarding the wasteland for so many years. She almost died several times and became the rations of those monsters. She had sacrificed everything for this family. Her childhood, her life, her freedom, she had sacrificed all of it. But now, because of you, you damnable brat, you've caused her to be replaced by that little girl who only knows how to think. Dudian was stunned. He knew that Aisha's life as a saint was very hard. But now it seemed that she wasn't completely against it. Instead, she was sincerely sacrificing for the family. That's right. If a person is against it, who can force him? Not to mention a strong person like her. He was silent as he thought of this. Chapter 510. You are just an ignorant kid from the outer wall. How dare you peek at the secret techniques of the Dragon Clan? With the IQ of the people from the outer wall, you want to learn the fighting techniques of our Dragon Clan? Harley felt that Dean was an eyesore. If Her Highness Aisha didn't save your life, then you would have been punished by the Dragon Penitentiary. You would have become the Dragon Worm's food. Dean was silent. He didn't argue with Harley because it was meaningless to argue with someone who was destined to be a passerby. Her Highness Aisha saved you this time. You could be spared from death, but you can't be spared from punishment. Harley coldly looked down at Dean. I called you over to tell you that you will be a member of our Dragon Clan from now on. You will never leave the Dragon Clan's territory. Otherwise, you will be killed without mercy. Dean wrinkled his brows as he looked up at him. Never leave. Of course. Harley didn't expect that Dean would dare to question him. Not only you will die if you dare to leak out the secret techniques of the Dragon Clan, but the people you leaked will also die. Your family, friends, and everyone related to you will all die. Dean frowned as he continued to ask, Since I'm a member of the Dragon Clan, then won't I have the freedom to leave this place? Harley didn't expect that the kid would dare to use his words against him. He sneered as he looked at Dean's eyes. Ordinary members of the Dragon Clan can leave, but you are just an outer wall member. Do you want to leave the Dragon Clan's territory? It's not that there isn't a way, but it's very simple. You will naturally be granted freedom when you have enough merits. I will recognize that you are a true member of the Dragon Clan at that time. But there was a bit of sarcasm on his face. It's a pipe dream for you to establish enough merits with your ability. How much does it mean to have enough merits? How do I get it? Dean turned a blind eye to Harley's sarcasm. Seeing that he still didn't give up, Harley sneered. It's not much, just 10,000 merit points. The way to obtain it is very simple. You will become a member of the Desolate Dragon Guard. Every time you go on a mission, there will be a random merit reward. Completing different missions will give you different merit rewards. These merit rewards will not only give you freedom, but can also be exchanged for secret fighting techniques, demon hunter dragon armor, and weapons from the ancient era? Weapons from the ancient era? Dean's eyes moved. The people of the Giant Wall naturally referred to the old era. Did the Dragon Clan have weapons left from the old era? What could it be? Guns? Tanks? Cannon? He thought that in addition to firearms, tanks and cannons were impossible to exist. After all, tanks contain the technology to convert diesel into electricity. There was also a computer system. If the dragons could restore the tanks of the old era, then the technology they had mastered behind the scenes was enough to flatten the Giant Wall. Why would they be limited to this small Giant Wall? I see. Thank you. Dean nodded as he began to ponder. Harley was surprised as he felt a trace of strangeness. The kid seemed to be different from the average person. If it was someone else who heard the previous humiliation, then they would have been filled with resentment or unwillingness. But Dean was extremely calm, as if he hadn't said those words. Well, he is a patient kid. Is he as good at scheming as that little girl? Harley thought in his heart and narrowed his eyes slightly. He had always disliked those who liked to use their brains. They were too good at scheming and not honest at all. They didn't know when they had been betrayed and needed to be on guard all the time. This made him very disgusted. Kid, Harley voice was slightly raised as he stared at Dean. Dean frowned as he felt the sudden change in Harley attitude. Your life was saved by Her Highness Aisha. You better never forget that. Harley said word by word. Dean was startled. He looked at him and nodded slightly. Harley deeply looked at him. Moreover, Her Highness Aisha saved your life not once but twice. Twice. Dean was startled as he looked at Harley Did Harley know about his childhood with Aisha? The second time was me. Harley's words dispelled Dean's speculation. If it wasn't for Her Royal Highness Aisha, who told me to take good care of you, then the first task I would have given you would be the most difficult one. It's what we call the corpse team. Dean was startled when he heard this, but soon understood. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. It seemed that the enemy he would have to face in the future wasn't just Haley, but the entire dragon family. Naturally, this also included those who stood on Aisha's side, like Harley in front of him. After all, He thought that Haley might use him to frame Aisha again. Other people who supported Aisha would naturally consider this point. Naturally, they hoped that the hidden danger would disappear. Aisha's face emerged in his mind as he thought of this. There was a trace of unspeakable feeling in his heart. The girl had considered this point long ago. That's why she specifically told Harley Ka to save his life. Strictly speaking, it was the third time. If you can survive and grow up, then you better remember Her Highness Aisha's kindness. Harley Ka said in a cold tone. Otherwise, I'll be the first to not let you go. Of course, if you die halfway, then forget what I said. But the probability is quite high. Although Her Highness Aisha told me to take care of you, but anything can happen outside the giant wall. You may encounter legendary monsters as soon as you get out of the giant wall. It's up to your luck whether you can survive or not. Dean was silent. You have half a month left. In this half a month, we will provide you with God's marrows and rare magic marks, so that you can break through and become a primary frontiersman. That way you will have a little power to protect yourself. Harley Ka indifferently said, wait for half a month. It will be your first mission. I will send you a relatively easy team and task. If you can't complete this mission and die outside the giant wall, then I can't do anything. I know. Thank you. Dean bowed slightly and said in a serious tone. Chapter 511. Yes, Elder. A figure came out from the shadows of the hall. It was a thin youth with pale skin and a handsome face. He looked at Dean. Come with me. Dean nodded, but he was secretly surprised. He didn't see this person's figure in the hall before. Moreover, he didn't see the slightest heat reaction from this person's body. He was like a corpse. This person's blood is cold. Dean's eyes lit up as he followed behind the youth. He was vigilant as he knew that he couldn't rely too much on his thermal vision in the future. He wouldn't be able to perceive monsters or special magic marks. After leaving the hall, Norwich and Dudian left the mountain. They walked along the gravel road and came to another mountain not far away. The foot of this mountain didn't have a magnificent castle like the previous one. Instead, it was a residential building. There were more than a dozen figures inside the building. Their bodies exuded different levels of heat. Some of them had extremely weak heat similar to ordinary people. It was estimated that they were servants or had a special magic mark ability to reduce the body heat. Norwich was a man of few words and remained silent throughout the journey. He paused for a moment in front of the residential building and said, "It's up there. Follow me." Dean followed him along the winding steps to the top of the mountain peak. The mountain peak was like a terrace field. There were residential buildings in each section of the mountain. Some had gardens and courtyards for drinking tea. In the blink of an eye, they reached the middle section of the mountain peak. Norwich went to a residential building and stood outside the guardrail. He called out to the house inside. Ian. Dean stood behind him. He saw 5 figures in the residential building. One of them was very strong. It was as hot as Cyrus. 3 of them were similar in heat, but slightly inferior. The last one was the weakest. It was similar to Francis from the monastery. The figures didn't respond to Norwich's words. They were still sitting or standing in the same position as before. With a creak, the door suddenly opened. A youth with wheat-colored hair opened the door. He had an indifferent expression, but there was a gloomy look in his eyes. Dean's heart turned cold. It was another person who was good at disguising magic marks. Ian frowned as he saw Norwich and Dean. "What's the matter?" Norwich smiled. "Your team is currently missing a member. His name is Dean. He is a new member of your team." Ian had expected Dudian's arrival. He looked up and down at Dudian. What did this person do before? Dragon attendant? From the looks of it, he seems quite weak. Norwich smiled. Dean is currently a senior hunter. He will be given resources to become a primary limitless hunter before the start of your next mission in half a month. He will be able to cooperate with your actions. A senior hunter? Ian's eyes widened. What did you say? Just a senior hunter? A tall and sturdy man with dark skin rushed out of the room. He looked a bit like a black man from the olden era. He stared at him with his large eyes that were clearly white and said, "Did you make a mistake? A few days ago, we just lost a rookie, and today, we brought another one. What do you think our seventh squad is? A squad that specializes in collecting trash? Norwich maintained his smile. This is the will of the elder. You. The burly man stared at him. Norwich smiled and said, Ian, I'll leave him to you. Also, the elder said that since you have 2 newbies this time, it's very likely that you will be sent to the Orange Wasteland for the next mission. So don't complain. Norwich waved his hand and turned around to leave. Ian and the black man froze for a moment after hearing Norwich's words, but they were relieved. Their eyes fell on Dean's body, and they sighed. They felt a trace of helplessness. You, Dean, come in and introduce yourself to everyone. Ian waved to Dean. Dean obeyed and walked over. After entering the room, he saw that it was extremely spacious. However, the living room was very messy. The floor was full of discarded fruit peels, overturned pastries, and other things. The light in the room was poor, and the air smelled bad. It was far from the fresh air outside. He had previously seen several people sitting on the sofa in the living room with their feet on the table. Their expressions were lazy and gloomy. Dean often saw this kind of gloomy expression on hunters. This was the temperament that people who had been fighting on the edge of life and death for a long time would naturally develop. However, the people in front of him were more obvious and gloomier. Let me introduce you to the new member. His name is Dean. Ian entered the living room and sat on an empty sofa chair. He pointed at Dean and said to the rest of the people. The rest of the people bowed their heads and picked their nails. They were lazily lying on the sofa with their hands spread out. They didn't look up at Dean because of his introduction. However, there were 2 people who looked at Dean. One of them was the one with the weakest heat. He was a blond youth with a scar on his face. He looked ordinary, but at the moment his eyes were full of curiosity. At the same time, there was a trace of joy in his eyes. It seemed that he had found his companion. The other one was a slender woman in black. Her expression was indifferent as she quietly examined Dean. I heard that it's another rookie? A young man who was leaning on the sofa lazily said. The burly man heard the words and said angrily, Elder, are you planning to make our team a rookie team? You actually sent 2 rookies. There are only 7 people. Now 2 rookies are rookies. The 5 of us are nannies. Ian was slightly silent. The woman in black who was looking at Dean indifferently said, Who let Miso die? I guess the elder thinks that we can't carry out the task in the Red Wasteland without Miso. So he sent 2 rookies so that we can carry out the task in the Orange Wasteland. At the same time, we can cultivate the rookies. There was silence in the living room as they heard his words. Ian sighed and shook his head. In any case, the task in the Orange Wasteland isn't low. Don't take it lightly. Moreover, as long as we can complete all the tasks, we will get thousands of merit points even if we are in the Orange Wasteland. The blond youth with a scar on his face asked curiously, Who is Miso? Chapter 5:12. The golden-haired youth responded with an "oh" and did not speak again. Dean looked at Ian and asked, Are you the current captain? What do you mean by Red Wasteland and Orange Wasteland? Are they different areas with different levels of danger? Ian glanced at him and said, That's right. The Red Wasteland is very dangerous. It's easy to encounter some high-level demons that the pioneers missed. Even the pioneers could lose their lives in the Red Wasteland if they're not careful. Ian nodded. Dean's eyes flashed and said, So, the previous Captain Miso was a pioneer? Hearing this, the eyes of the people in the room slightly turned and fell on Dean. Ian looked at Dean for a while and said, No, Miso is a high-level limitless like us. However, he has mastered a secret fighting skill, and his fighting capacity is much stronger than ours. He can even exchange a few blows with the pioneers. Dean understood and was surprised. He didn't expect the secret fighting technique of the Dragon Clan to be so strong. Just by mastering it, he could show disdain for others of the same level. However, the one who died was the strongest and not the weakest. It was ironic. Dean didn't continue to inquire about the cause of death of Miso. He had just joined the team. If he asked about this, it would be easy to touch their sore spot. No one would answer, and it would be embarrassing. He directly asked, You just said that we can get thousands of merit points by completing all the tasks? Are the tasks difficult to complete? How often do we go on a mission? How long does it take to complete each mission? Ian looked at him. He felt that this newcomer had a calm temperament compared to the previous one. In the battle outside the giant wall, this was undoubtedly an advantage. Although he felt a little annoyed with Dean and the blonde youth next to him, but he also knew that they were sent by the elders. It was useless to complain about them. On the contrary, it would create gaps in the team. If they wanted to complete the tasks, they would inevitably need to cooperate with the team. If there was a gap in the execution of the tasks, there would inevitably be some sad situations. Every time we carry out a mission, our superiors will assign us a main mission and a few side missions. We can choose to complete these side missions and get extra rewards, but it will take up a lot of time. In the barren area, every second we spend in the barren area is one step closer to death. No one can predict what will happen in the next second, so we usually only do the main missions that we must complete, Ian explained. How often do we go on a mission? Dean repeated. Ian vaguely guessed his intentions, and a meaningful look flashed in his eyes as he said, every time a mission is completed, there's a month of rest and adjustment time. If a team member is sacrificed, they will get an extra month of rest, and at the same time, a new team member will be added. Dean wrinkled his brows. Generally, the casualty rate should be very high, right? Kid, why are you asking so many questions? If you're afraid of death, then leave as soon as possible. The black man from before snorted. Dean didn't pay attention to him. He didn't even look at him. He just looked at Ian. Ian saw that Dean was waiting for his answer. Yes, the casualty rate is very high. If you are lucky, then the whole team can come back safely. If you are unlucky, then it is very common for the whole team to be destroyed. Dean nodded and asked, what if the main task is not completed? How many merit points are there for the Red Wasteland tasks? If the task is not completed, then the same amount of merit points will be deducted. If your merit points become negative 3,000, then your status as a Dragon Guard will be canceled, and you will be sent to the Dragon Guard team in the Wasteland. Ian looked at him and said, the reward for the main mission in the Red Wasteland usually ranges from 3,000 to 5,000 merit points. If you complete all the additional missions, you can even get tens of thousands of merit points at once. But that is impossible. No one would do the additional missions when they are in the Red Wasteland. That would be suicide. Ian looked at Ian and said, Dragon Guard? Dean was surprised. Yes, the job of the Dragon Guard is to follow the Saintess to guard the Wasteland. The death rate is very high. Ian said, it is said that in the past 200 years since the establishment of the Dragon family, there were no more than 3 Dragon Guards who were able to live until retirement. Dean understood that Ian was a dead man. If we want to carry out the Red Wasteland task, then we can only be sent by the higher-ups. Can't we choose by ourselves? Dean asked. Of course. Ian shrugged. How can we have a right to choose? Dean nodded. He had the same feeling in his heart, but he didn't show it. He secretly calculated. The rest time for each task is 2 months. If we carry out the Orange Wasteland task, then it will take at least 2 years to accumulate tens of thousands of merit points and get the right to act freely. 2 years was not a long time for an ordinary teenager who was about to turn 18 years old. It was just a memory of the green years of life. But for him, it was undoubtedly a long and fatal time. It was absolutely a pipe dream for him to live for 2 years when he could encounter Haley and Aisha's supporters at any time. Moreover, after 2 years, he would accumulate enough merit points which would make him stronger. This would definitely arouse Haley's killing intent. After all, in her opinion, he was already on Aisha's side. I have to find a way to sneak out and produce the new invention. Dean's eyes flashed as he pondered in his heart. Honestly, completing the task to get merit points was simply taking his life as a joke. You have just come to report. There's an empty room above. You can live there in the future. Ian said to Dean, your resources will be sent soon after half a month. Be sure to master the ability to improve. Don't play abnormally in the battle. If you have nothing to do, then you can find us to learn from each other. Dean looked at him. He knew that Ian was thinking about the team. Ian was worried that he wouldn't be able to master the soaring strength and newly acquired ability after he was promoted from senior hunter to primary limitless. "I will master myself," Dean said. It was inevitable that his magic marks would be exposed if they were to learn from each other. Most importantly, he was also worried that if he suddenly promoted to primary limitless, then he would kill them in case he couldn't control his strength well. Chapter 513. It didn't take long for 2 dragon attendants to bring a box. There were some small bottles inside. Dean had seen the god's marrows before. In addition to the god's marrows, there were 8 finger-long, transparent bottles. There were 8 parasitic soul worms in different shapes. These parasitic soul worms had different appearances. Some looked like caterpillars, green and soft. Some were black and had soft tentacles that looked like snails. Some looked like iron nematodes, and their bodies were silver and looked like thin threads. At a glance, Dean saw that there were 8 rare, named monsters. "These are the resources for you. It will be enough for you to stimulate your magic marks in half a month." Ian handed the box to Dean. "Take it. If you want to get these resources in the future, you have to earn it yourself." Dean nodded. He knew that this matter wasn't without harm. Although he could collect 8 rare parasitic soul worms with his previous identity as the 9th elder of the Dark Church, but it was hard to say how much time he would have. As for the god's marrows, he would have to spend a lot of effort to get them. Moreover, the amount of god's marrows, he wouldn't be able to get enough. Although his new invention could give him the power to protect himself, but if his physique was too weak, then he would be assassinated by the other side. After all, the invention was an external force. He didn't have the ability and materials to make a missile or a nuclear reactor. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to protect himself. After all, in front of a non-human powerhouse like the Pioneer, no matter how powerful the weapon was, it would be useless. He would be killed before he could launch it. He took the box and returned to the empty room upstairs that Ian had told him about. This room used to be filled with junk. It was covered in dust, and there were some spider webs in the corner. He cleaned it up a little and only emptied the bed. He didn't care about the rest. He didn't plan on staying here for long anyway. He opened the box and took out the god's marrows. He opened the bottle and sniffed it. It was similar to the batch of god's marrows that Hathaway gave him last time. He pondered for a moment and decided to find something else to try first. After all, he had no idea how many people he had to pass the god's marrow to in the process of it being delivered to him. If someone tried to harm him and mixed a little poison into the god's marrow, he could inject it into his body. No matter how strong his physique was, he would still fall for it. His eyes flickered as he suddenly thought of the golden-haired young man from before. His heart skipped a beat, and after a moment of hesitation, he made up his mind. At night, Dean came to Eugene's room and knocked on the door. The door opened quickly. Eugene looked at Dean. "It's you? You're still awake?" Dean smiled. "No, I want to talk to you." Eugene was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Sure, I was also worried about being alone." With that, he opened the door completely. Dean entered Eugene's room and looked around. It was similar to his own room. There were almost no decorations. He looked at Eugene, who closed the door. "I heard that you were a newcomer. You should have just become a primary frontiersman, right?" Eugene went back to the bed and sat down. "Yeah, I was sent here as a primary frontiersman. Am I unlucky?" Dudian smiled. "Are you nervous?" "It's all right." Eugene shrugged. "You only have one life anyway. It doesn't matter if you die." Dean heard his funny words and smiled. "It's too boring to die like this. We have to live well." "That's true." Eugene smiled. Dean took out 2 bottles of god's marrows and a syringe from his arms. "These are the resources that were sent to me today. I have estimated that there are more. I hope this can help you improve your strength." "For me?" Eugene looked at him in surprise. Then his eyes flashed as if he had thought of something, and a hint of realization appeared in his eyes. Dean pretended to be embarrassed and scratched his head. "I'm also a newcomer. You have heard that I'm more unlucky than you. I was caught when I was a senior hunter. In half a month, we will have to go on a mission. It'll be very dangerous. The others are too strong. They may not take care of us during the mission. Once I break through to primary frontiersmen, our physiques will be the same. If we fall behind, we could take care of each other." Eugene knew that the newcomer wanted to build a relationship with him so that he wouldn't die during the mission. Dean laughed. "We will be teammates in the future, so we should take care of each other. I can't accept this thing. I'll treat it as a friend. Since you regard me as a friend, you should accept the things. Otherwise, I will feel sorry." Dean enthusiastically stuffed the things into his hands. Eugene didn't refuse. After all, it was just 2 bottles of God's marrow. It wouldn't improve his strength by much. However, he understood Dean's approach. After all, God's marrows were very precious for a senior hunter. Only 1 or 2 bottles of God's marrows were enough to make a senior hunter's physique soar. Therefore, Dean thought that these 2 bottles of God's marrows would improve his physique. That's why Dean only took out 2 bottles to please him. Eugene didn't explain anything as he put the God's marrow on the table. "I'll accept it. We will take care of each other in the future mission." Dean nodded and looked at the God's marrow on the table. "You should absorb it now. I heard that the longer you keep it, the lower the effectiveness." "I'll use it before going to bed." Eugene laughed. Dean didn't continue to persuade Eugene to avoid being exposed. He chatted with him for a while and tried to get more information out of him. After chatting for a while, he found an excuse to leave. Dean's pupils shrank as he left the room. The world entered into a thermal vision. He turned around and left without looking back, but he was observing Eugene in the room through the thermal vision. He saw Eugene sit back on the bed. Eugene reached out to the table and picked up the God's marrow. It seemed that Eugene was sizing up the God's marrow. But the next moment, Dean was slightly startled. Eugene looked at the God's marrow for a moment. He put the God's marrow back and put it into the drawer of the table. He didn't use it. Dean frowned. It seemed that Eugene wasn't as simple and easygoing as he seemed. Eugene was on guard against him, as he was worried that Dean would play tricks in the God's marrow. Dean was speechless. He went back to the room and considered other methods to verify the information. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Chapter 514. He lost 2 bottles of God's marrows. Dean had to change his target. On the 3rd night, he went to the mountain under the guise of taking a walk. He relied on his thermal vision to find some small animals living in the mountain. He caught a little thing that looked like a pangolin and injected the divine marrow he had prepared in advance into this little thing's body. He didn't use these animals for the test because he considered the characteristics of the God's marrows. It might not be perfectly reflected in animals. After all, the structure of the human body was different from that of animals. God's marrows were similar to drugs, so there would be some special reactions due to these differences. It was impossible to verify whether the reactions came from the differences between humans and animals or from the God's marrows. After the injection, Dean picked up the little thing and prepared to take it back to his residence for further observation. Who would have thought that as soon as he picked up the little thing, it would suddenly struggle violently? The scales all over its body were faintly blood red, and its tiny eyes were also slightly red. Its eyeballs were bloodshot, as if it had suddenly turned from a docile animal into a bloodthirsty monster. Dean was startled, as he didn't expect the effect to be so fast. He immediately put the little thing down. As soon as the little thing landed on the ground, it turned around and rushed towards Dean. Dean's figure flashed as he dodged the little thing's attack. He was about to reach out his hand to stop it. Suddenly, its body that was pouncing forward stiffened and stopped. It fell to the ground in pain, its claws desperately clawing at the ground. It didn't last for 7 or 8 seconds before its body stopped moving. A lot of blood flowed out of its bloodshot eyes, mouth, ears, and other parts. It was dead. Dean was startled as his face turned gloomy. Considering the fierce effect of the God's marrows, he deliberately took out a drop and diluted it with water before injecting it. The effect of the marrows shouldn't be so strong that it would kill the little thing. This thing is poisonous. Dean felt a layer of goosebumps on his skin. He was just testing the waters. He even felt sorry for the 2 bottles of God's marrows that he had lost to Eugene. But he didn't expect that there was a problem with the marrows. Of course, there was a very small possibility that the little thing's body structure wasn't suitable to bear even a drop of God's marrows. Dean's face was gloomy and uncertain. He stared at the bleeding little thing on the ground. After a moment, he bent down to dig a hole in the ground and buried the little thing in it. After covering it with soil, he turned around and left. His expression returned to normal after he returned to his residence, but his heart was gloomy. If it was poisonous, it meant that the people in the dragon clan who wanted to harm him couldn't wait any longer. It was very dangerous to be a member of the dragon clan. He could die at any time outside the giant wall, but it was just a possibility. But the dragon clan wanted to increase the probability of this possibility to a necessity. The person who framed me must be the one who came in contact with the god's marrow. I can't investigate this with my current identity. I can't be sure if it's Aisha's supporters or Haley's people who did it. Dean thought quickly, but if I were Haley, I wouldn't do that. After all, in her eyes, my existence is an important chess piece. It's more likely that the people who supported Aisha did it. They want me to die and not implicate her. There was a trace of anger in his heart as he thought of this. Although he understood these people's way of doing things, but if he hadn't been deceived by Hathaway so many times in the prison and in the ninth area of the Dark Church, he wouldn't have been so vigilant after being deceived by Hathaway once. Without his vigilance, he would be completely screwed this time. It seems that the Dragon Clan doesn't want to let go of any opportunity to put me to death. Dean smiled as he greeted Eugene. He went back to his room and closed the door. The smile on his face disappeared as he looked at the box of God's marrows beside his bed. His heart was filled with anger and regret. He wouldn't use this batch of God's marrows again. This meant that he had lost the resources to enhance his strength. It seems that I can only rely on these parasitic soul worms. He looked at the 8 bottles next to the box. There was a parasitic soul worm in each bottle. These parasitic soul worms couldn't be kept for too long. At this moment, the 8 worms didn't feel as energetic as before. They were lazily lying in the bottle. Occasionally, they would move or gently wriggle. Relying on parasitic soul worms could be used as nourishment to enhance the physique. However, this method was too wasteful. After all, it was very difficult to encounter a named monster, let alone kill one. However, at this point, Dean couldn't care so much. Before going to the wasteland, he must enhance his strength as soon as possible so that his life would be more secure. After all, outside the giant wall, accidents could happen. Just like when he was just a scavenger in the area that had been cleaned by the hunters, he still encountered a powerful Festi and almost lost his life. The probability of this kind of thing happening in the wasteland should be higher. Thinking of this, Dean came to the bed and picked up the weakest parasitic soul worm. He recognized that it was a parasitic soul worm that was named by the bloodthirster. If he used it as his magic mark, he would get the ability to control the blood and would be immune to certain toxins. Linda, who had died in his hands, had a similar magic mark. Dean took it out and put it into the syringe. He began to absorb it. There's a problem in the god's marrow. They shouldn't do anything to these parasitic soul worms. Moreover, it would be more complicated if they did something to the parasitic soul worms. Dean was a little relieved after absorbing these parasitic soul worms. Of course, if there was a problem with these parasitic soul worms, he could only admit defeat. Soon, the first parasitic soul worm was absorbed. Dean continued to absorb the second one. When he was captured by the Dragon Clan, he was close to the limit of the senior hunter's bottleneck. At this moment, after absorbing the first parasitic soul worm, he had completely reached the bottleneck state. The remaining 7 parasitic soul worms could be used as energy to activate the magic mark. The night was getting darker. 7 parasitic soul worms were injected into Dean's body one after another. The splitter's magic mark on his chest was still as black as ink. Its shape didn't change, and it didn't fill up. Dean could not help but wryly smile when he saw such a reaction. Last time when he evolved to Senior Hunter, he realized that the number and quality of parasitic soul worms needed to activate and evolve his legendary deified magic marks were higher than other magic marks. Now, it seemed that an ordinary rare magic mark only needed 8 rare parasitic soul worms as nourishment to activate it to become a primary limitless one. However, he reckoned that he would need a lot more. He might even need rare quality parasitic soul worms to have a stronger effect. However, rare parasitic soul worms were rare and hard to come by. Not to mention nourishment, they were even rare to be used as magic marks. It seems that it's far away to become a primary limitless being by relying on the cultivation of the dragon clan. Dean thought in his heart. This time he was given such rich resources, but next time he might not get them. He had to rely on his own merits to exchange for them. However, this method of using merit points to exchange for items and having people use items to exchange for merit points was nothing more than a method and trading system established by those in power to enslave workers. If one followed the rules, one would never be able to leave this circle, because the biggest beneficiary was always the terminal. He touched the magic mark on his chest and put on his clothes again. He sighed in his heart. He was probably the first person among the dragon guards to enter the wasteland as a senior hunter. He looked at the box in front of his feet. His eyes flashed slightly. The next day, dawn had just risen. Ian, the black man, Ruby, and another woman in black named Rosemary were sparring on the training ground behind the house. The newcomer, Eugene, was watching from the side while the other two were sleeping soundly in their respective rooms. Dean woke up and had breakfast. He came to the training ground to say hello to Ian. Ian saw Dean and jumped back to avoid Ruby's punch. "Little Dean, do you want to come and play?" "No, I haven't used up the god's marrow. I'll wait until I become a primary limitless being." Dean shrugged. "You guys play first. I'll go out." Black man Ruby tilted his head and grinned. "Little guy, you should learn from Eugene. You'll get used to being abused. People grow the fastest when they're abused. Don't you think so? I'm not a sadist." Dean turned around without looking back. Ruby laughed. He didn't notice that Dean didn't say masochist, but sadist. Dean could hear the sound of Ian and Ruby fighting behind him as he walked out of the training ground. He didn't stop as he went to the top of the mountain. He pretended to be careless as he took out the god's marrow from his clothes. He dropped it on the steps of the mountain or on the grass. These places were not hidden, but not very conspicuous. It seemed as if they were left behind. Dean continued to throw the god's marrows all over the mountain after strolling around. He met other dragon guards along the way, but they didn't take the initiative to greet him as they didn't know each other. He returned to his residence after throwing the god's marrow. He put the rest of the god's marrow into his clothes and put it all over the mountain. "Don't blame me if I can't find out who the dragon clan wants to kill me." Dean's eyes flashed coldly. As the saying goes, every debt has its debtor. But since he couldn't find the creditor, then he could only wait for the creditor to take the initiative to find him. As for the truly unlucky ones, they were the ones who picked up the god's elixir and used it because they were greedy for small gains. He knew that these people were innocent, but he still had to do it because it was beneficial to him. This thing was given by the dragon clan. Blame the dragon clan. His expression was calm as he leisurely returned to the training field. At this moment, the field was already filled with Eugene sparring with a woman in black named Rosemary. The woman's expression was cold, and her movements were direct and efficient. Eugene was so tired that he was sweating profusely, as if he was in the heat of summer. However, Rosemary was like an iceberg. Not a single drop of sweat could be seen on her body. Dean sat on the sidelines and looked at the battle. As the saying goes, the onlooker sees more clearly. Very soon, he saw the difference between the two of them. Eugene's movements were too big during the battle, which resulted in a waste of energy. Rosemary, on the other hand, was calm. Her attacks were straightforward and direct, without the slightest bit of sloppiness. The difference between her and Eugene was like heaven and earth. When people looked at her, they would feel that Eugene was very stupid. Dean knew that Eugene wouldn't have such a feeling if he only watched Eugene's battle. On the contrary, he would feel that Eugene's posture was a sharp deterrent. But Rosemary's contrast made him feel that Eugene was stupid. This gave him a hint of insight. It wasn't that he had to be straightforward in battle. This was a principle that he had long understood, but that he had to understand the contrast and contrast. This might be a simple principle, but if it was put to use, it would become a very sharp weapon. Light needs to be set off by darkness. Darkness also needs to be set off by light. Dean's eyes lit up as he thought of the holy church and the dark church in the outer wall. The monastery used such a simple truth that everyone understood. But when it came out, there would be two contrasting organizations. All the geniuses of the outer wall would join the holy church, while those who liked to be independent would choose to join the dark church. But no matter what, the mastermind behind all this was the Pope alone, as well as the monastery behind him. What are you thinking about? Ian sat down with a glass of water. Dean recovered and smiled. I feel that they are very powerful. Really? Ian looked at the two of them and said with a smile, You're talking about Mary, right? She's just playing. I asked her to practice with Eugene. After you absorb all the god's marrow in a few days, you can come and practice as well. Otherwise, your body's reaction won't match your mind's reaction. Dean nodded. Days passed by. Ian was getting more and more puzzled. On the 5th day, he finally heard the news from Ian. 2 members of the 13th squad were poisoned and were sent to the rescue center. They couldn't perform the next mission and had to be filled with new people. The news spread quickly as they lived on the same mountain. Other teams also knew about the matter. After hearing the news that Ian brought back, Ruby, Rosemary, and the others looked at each other with a strange expression on their faces. The dragon guards were poisoned? On this mountain, the only possibility of being poisoned was food poisoning, right? But how is that possible? If it wasn't, then it meant that someone intentionally poisoned them. Moreover, the possibility was higher. Chapter 5:15. Were they poisoned? Eugene looked around at the crowd and asked tentatively, Damn it, this kind of dirty thing actually happened again. Ruby looked angry. They haven't even set off yet, and they're already using dirty tricks to compete. These despicable people. Ian slightly frowned. Things haven't been investigated clearly, so don't jump to conclusions. If they were poisoned, then it's best not to leave the residents alone during this time, so as not to be tricked. Eugene glanced at him and said, They were probably poisoned by their teammates, right? Ian turned to look at him. What do you mean? Eugene looked at him cautiously and said, 2 people were poisoned at once, and at the same time. If it was an outsider who poisoned them, it would be very difficult to succeed. Also, they were poisoned, so they would be sent to recuperate, and new members would be added in. If the other members of their team are dissatisfied with these 2 people, then wouldn't it be better to use this method to kick them out? Upon hearing this, Ian, Ruby, and the others glanced at him and guessed what he meant. Ian shook his head slightly and said, You don't have to worry about anything. It's impossible for someone from the same team to poison them. That's because the people who filled in at the last minute are all rookies like you guys. As for your original teammates, you've worked with them at least once or twice, so you have some understanding of them. They are much better than rookies. Eugene let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, I was thinking too much. Ian ignored him and looked at Dean, who was silent next to him. Don't go out during this time. Stay in the residence and train well. Dean nodded. The next day, another person was poisoned. The news spread again. All the dragon guards who lived on the mountain became cautious and no longer went out for a walk alone. In the blink of an eye, the date of the expedition was near. On this day, a team suddenly arrived outside the residence of Team 7. The leader of the team was a short but strong man. He was no more than 1 meter tall and seemed to have dwarfism. However, his arms were large and his body was stocky. He carried 2 2-meter-long axes on his back like 2 black flags. He looked extremely domineering. Norwich was next to him. He took a step forward and shouted. Ian, who was enjoying lunch with the others in the living room, had already noticed the commotion outside. When he heard Norwich's voice, he frowned slightly and realized that something bad was about to happen. You guys eat first, he said, and got up to open the door. When he saw the short, stocky man next to Norwich, his expression changed. He immediately bowed and said, Greetings, Deacon Tander. The short man coldly snorted. Get the kid named Dean out of your team. Ian was puzzled, but quickly nodded. He turned around and called out to Dean, who was eating in the living room. Dean had long sensed the aggressive group of people outside. He knew that the bait had finally caught the real big fish. He got up and walked out of the room. His gaze immediately fell on a short, stocky man beside Norwich. The man's body was surging with heat, even stronger than Ian's. "Are you Dean?" The short man looked up and down at Dean and said coldly, "You're the one who poisoned the other teams these days, right? This time you have committed a big crime. Come back with me and prepare to serve your sentence." Ian, who was standing next to Dean, was stunned. Eugene and others in the room were also stunned. The poisoner who had caused such an uproar in the past few days was actually this newcomer in their team. Dean smiled. "Deacon Tan, I'm just a newcomer. Don't you think it's a good idea to wrongly accuse me?" "Well, evidence?" The short man's voice was cold. "I'll talk to you about evidence once you are in prison." Dean narrowed his eyes and smiled. "So you don't have evidence. Since you don't have evidence, can you arrest people? Or are you going to confess under torture?" "Don't talk nonsense. Do you want me to personally capture you?" The short man scolded. Dean raised his eyebrows as he looked at Norwich, who was standing next to him. Norwich was aware of Dean's gaze. He was helpless in his heart. He wanted to observe Dean, but the attitude of the short man was too tough. He knew that there would be big trouble if he continued to watch the drama. He whispered, "Deacon Tander, Dean is a member of the Dragon Hall. You can't take him away if you don't have evidence." The short man was stunned and turned his head to look at him. Suddenly, he seemed to understand something. There was a trace of gloominess in his eyes as he said, "Elder Harley Kyle wants to protect him?" Norwich helplessly replied, "This is the rule of the Dragon Hall. It has nothing to do with Elder Harley." The short man stared at him, snorted, and turned to look at Dean. "Do you want evidence? I'll give you evidence. You are also a senior hunter. Considering your low physique, the clan gave you a batch of resources. However, you poisoned the gods' marrows and scattered them all over the mountain. People picked them up and used them, causing them to be poisoned." Everyone was stunned as they heard his words. They looked at Dean in unison. They didn't expect the youth to be so scheming. Dean smiled. "Deacon Tander, you have wronged me. You have said that I have poisoned the gods' marrows and scattered them all over the mountain. The problem is that those who picked them up were poisoned. Do you mean that I have enmity with everyone on the mountain? I'm a newcomer who has just joined the Dragon Hall. I'm not familiar with the people on my team, let alone the others. Moreover, the gods' marrows are so precious. Why would I do such a thing? It's harmful to others and not beneficial to myself." The short man's face turned ugly. He realized that the evidence he had given was the truth, but it was tantamount to a lie if it didn't make sense logically. He didn't want to argue with Dean. As Dean had said, it was the simplest and most effective way to torture him. But he didn't expect that Elder Harley would protect Dean. Didn't that simple-minded fool know that Dean's existence was a hidden danger to Aisha? Ian and the others secretly nodded as they heard Dean's words. Indeed, they would never do such a thing unless Dean was a madman. But after these days of contact with Dean, Ian knew that Dean's mental state was very normal. This could only mean that Dean had offended someone. They had long since become accustomed to this sort of thing and were inured to it. The short man's eyes were gloomy as he saw everyone looking at him. He couldn't say anything about Dean's identity as it was related to the change of Saintess and the reputation of the former Saintess Aisha. He was the only one who knew about the poison in God's marrows, so he couldn't say it. He could say that Dean's smell was on the bottle, which could prove that the God's marrows were Dean's. But the smell could be added. As long as they could find Dean's clothes, then the God's marrow would be stained with his smell. Such evidence was too weak. Suddenly, he thought of something and his eyes lit up. He stared at Dean and sneered. "Evidence? Do you still have the God's marrow? Can you take it out?" Dean shrugged. "I've absorbed it." The short and strong man was waiting for this sentence. He sneered and said, "Finished absorbing? In other words, you have evolved into a primary limitless?" Dean understood his intention. He calmed down and said, "Yes." Chapter 516. Norwich was hesitant. He looked at Dudian. He saw Dudian's calm expression. He nodded. "All right, no problem." "Humph." The short man snorted and looked at Dean. "You heard my words. Now I'm going to test your strength. Are you ready?" Dudian smiled. "How was the test?" The short, stocky man sneered. Victory was in his grasp. He pointed to a person in the team behind him and said, "Moss, come out and fight with him." Mass was a calm young man. He nodded and stepped out of the queue. He said to Dean, "Punch me. I'm also a primary frontiersman. If your strength is comparable to mine, then you can prove yourself." Dean nodded and walked down the steps. At this time, Ruby, Eugene, and the others had already walked out of the room and were watching the test. Dean came in front of Maze. "I'm going to punch. Come on." Maze put up a defensive posture. Whoosh. Dean's fist whistled as it swept out. The fist immediately smashed into Mass's raised arm. With a muffled bang, Mass's steady footsteps immediately swayed slightly. He couldn't help but take 2 steps back before he stopped. There was a faint red fist mark on his arm. The short man was startled as he saw the scene. He shook his numb hands. There was a trace of surprise in his heart. He felt that Dean's strength was stronger than him, a primary frontiersman. "Is this okay?" Dean looked at the short man. The short, stout man came back to his senses and his face darkened. "How do you feel?" he asked Thomas. Moss looked back at him with an ashamed expression. He lowered his head and said, "I feel like my strength is on par with mine." The short man's eyes lit up as he heard Dudian's words. He was puzzled, but soon thought of a reason. Some of the magic marks could increase the strength of the human body. It's too one-sided to test the strength alone. There is also speed and reaction. The short man said, "Maze, go and compare speed with him." "Yes." Maze nodded. "From here to the hillside steps. Let's see who gets there first." The short and stocky man pointed and said to the two, "Get ready." Dean and Marcy immediately stood at his designated starting line. When the short and strong man shouted, the two of them exerted their strength and rushed out almost at the same time. At the same time, Dean felt the wind whistling in his face. It was a kind of carefree feeling, but his vision always fell on Mouse next to him, lest he accidentally ran to his heart's content and get rid of him. Soon, under his control, the two of them arrived at almost the same time. Seeing this result, the short man's face became extremely ugly. There were magic marks that increased strength and speed, but there were very few magic marks that increased both at the same time. How to measure the reaction? Dean trotted back and asked the short man. The short, stocky man looked at him deeply, turned around and said, "There's no need to test." Dean saw that he was about to leave and immediately said, "So, can you prove that I am not the one who poisoned you?" The corner of the short man's mouth twitched. He clenched his fists and walked away in big strides. Norwich smiled helplessly as he looked at the angry man leave. He waved to Dean and Ian and followed the short man. There was still a smile on Dean's face as he watched them leave, but his eyes gradually turned cold. It was obvious that this person was the one who poisoned him in the god's marrow. Maybe he was one of the people who poisoned him. In any case, the person who poisoned him couldn't get away from him. Ian and others came over while Dean was secretly remembering the name of this person. "Little Do, you seem to have offended someone." Ian looked at him with a meaningful look. Dean looked back at him and nodded. "It seems so." Ruby patted his shoulder. "Don't worry about anything. No one can say that you are guilty as long as you are innocent. So what if I offend a few people? Who doesn't offend a few king despicable people in their lives?" Dean didn't expect the rough man to comfort him. He smiled, "Yes." "What do you mean, yes?" Ruby emphasized in a loud voice. Ian smiled and said, "You should have said that earlier." Ruby was speechless. He scratched his head and said, "Wasn't that person here just now?" Everyone burst into laughter. This little episode passed quickly, and everyone returned to their previous state. As the deadline of the mission was approaching, even Luna and Martin, who rarely went out to exercise, went to the training ground every day to exercise. Although they didn't use their full strength, but they could restore their combat sensitivity. 15 days passed in the blink of an eye. Norwich came to the residence early in the morning and issued tasks to everyone. "Listen, this time your task location is Orange Wasteland." Norwich glanced at the scroll. "The main task is to hunt down a silencer in Orange Wasteland number 3. The reward is 700 medals, and the person who kills it will get 60% of the reward. In addition, there are 3 additional tasks. There is no need to talk about the first and second points. The third point is to find the real body of the mysterious footprints in Orange Wasteland number 3 or provide clues. The reward ranges from 500 to 3,000 medals. If you find the real body of the mysterious footprints, you will be rewarded 3,000 medals, and the person who finds it will get 60% of the reward. Ian, Ruby, and the others were dumbfounded. Rosemary, who had always been quiet, couldn't help but ask. The reward of the third additional task is so much? Is it more than the main task? What is the origin of the mysterious footprints? Norwich shrugged. Not long ago, there was a team that carried out a task in Orange Wasteland number 3 and brought back some news. As for the origin of the footprints, we don't know. But according to the Monster Research Institute, there is no such footprints recorded in the Atlas of Monsters. It is likely to be a newly evolved species or a monster that came out from the depths of the wasteland. Ian and others were startled. Their faces turned pale as they came to their senses. If this thing left footprints in Orange Wasteland number 3, then wouldn't it be very dangerous? Ruby couldn't help but ask. Norwich said, "It's hard to say. That thing may have left. Moreover, if it is a newly evolved species, then it will be very strong. The possibility of it coming out from the depths of the wasteland is not big, so you don't have to worry about it. Of course, it's better to be cautious." Ian and others looked at each other with heavy hearts. Chapter 517. Norwich glanced at him, smiled, and said, "You can ask your captain about this." He handed the scroll to Ian. "This is the pattern of the mysterious footprint and the mission record. As for the rest of the rules, I don't need to tell you in detail." "No." Ian took the scroll and watched Norwich leave. He bowed his head and opened the scroll. Ruby, Eugene, and Luna immediately looked at the scroll. On the scroll, there was a 3-clawed footprint in the shape of a Y. The first 2 slender footprints branched off, while the last one was a slightly shorter one. Below the footprints, there was an extremely detailed drawing of the wasteland ruins, and the footprints were deeply embedded in the ground. Next to the footprints was a measuring line. The 2 front claws were 7 centimeters long, and the back claws were 3 centimeters long. The total length was 1 meters. It was equivalent to half the body length of an ordinary person. The width was 6 centimeters, and the depth of the footprint was 3 centimeters. These data showed a lot of information about the monster. "Martin, what kind of monster do you think it is?" Ian asked Martin, who was next to him. Martin stared at the pattern on the scroll. "I have never seen it before, but from the shape of the claws, it should be a crawling monster. Most of the crawling monsters are cold-blooded monsters. They like to stay in sticky and wet places." Eugene was curious. "Why is it a crawling monster? Aren't there a lot of monsters with claws like this?" Martin glanced at him and frowned slightly. He was a little impatient with these ignorant newbies, but now that the mission was imminent, he couldn't be bothered to argue with him. He coldly said, "This can be observed from the height of the footsteps. If it's not a crawling monster, then it should be an upright monster. Based on the size of the footprints, its height and size should be very shocking, so the footprints left behind shouldn't be so shallow." Eugene came to a realization and kept nodding. Ian stared at the footprints for a while. He put away the scroll and said to everyone, "Well, if you have anything to say, then we will talk on the way. Time is pressing. Go change your equipment and get ready to go. Remember to bring supplies. If we find the mysterious footprints, then we may be able to complete the additional mission. But it will take a lot of time. We must not cut off our supplies." Yes, everyone obeyed. After returning to their rooms, they put on the equipment they had prepared beforehand. Dean and Eugene received the basic standard equipment of the Dragon Guards. It was a set of dark armor. The material was like metal, but also like plastic. It firmly wrapped the body. The collar, wrists, knees, and other places of the armor were embedded with glittering crystals. Dean had seen this crystal from Hathaway's wrist. It was a meteorite that could isolate the high-intensity radiation outside the wall. In addition to the basic armor, both of them also had basic weapons. Dean reported his occupation as an archer and received a bow. The bow's entire body was flowing silver, its lines extremely beautiful, but the two ends of the bow were very sharp, like two strange teeth, and the bowstring was dark red, like a full blood vessel. The pulling force was extremely strong, and even with his strength, he needed 60 to 70% of his strength to pull the bow to its full circle. Although it was a basic weapon, it was considered an extremely powerful divine weapon for the dragon guards. After putting on the equipment, the rest was the supplies. It was a very sturdy black bag. The material was like glue, waterproof, and thermal insulation. It was filled with 12 food boxes and 2 bottles of purified water. Dean estimated that the supplies were enough for a primary limitless to eat and drink for 12 days. If he was frugal, then it would be enough for half a month. He didn't care too much about the food. After all, he had spent 3 years of scavenger training. He knew how to find food and water outside the giant wall. Hunters and dragon guards wouldn't waste time to learn this knowledge. Instead of wasting time learning how to survive, it was better to spend the time learning how to fight. They could increase their strength and finish the task faster. As for survival, no matter how much they struggled, once they encountered a powerful monster, it would be a dead end. Soon, everyone was fully equipped. Dean soon saw Ruby in the team. He was carrying a huge bag full of water and food. The amount of food he carried was much more than their standard amount. The amount of food in this bag was comparable to the total amount of food carried by the other 6 people. Dean understood Ian's intention. Carrying too much food outside the giant wall would slow down their movement speed. But they weren't acting alone. They were a team. Therefore, Ruby's main responsibility in the early stage was to take care of the food. The fighting could be handed over to the others. This was the efficiency of the team. When it was time to set off, everyone had one last meal before leaving the Dragon Clan. Ian led the team to ride the dragon horse that was specially trained by the Dragon Clan. They went to the passage outside the giant wall. "Captain, how long are we going to go? When will we come back?" Eugene asked Ian. Ian said, "The reward for the main mission this time is quite high. It's 700. You can come back when you finish the mission. Otherwise, we will deduct 700 merit points. If we split it evenly among everyone, we will deduct 100 merit points. 100 merit points isn't much. We're going to perform such a dangerous task and only get so little merit points. The higher-ups are too stingy," Eugene complained. Ian looked at him. 100 merit points is not bad. We can exchange a lot of things with it. Eugene looked at the strange-looking saber on his waist and asked curiously, "Like this saber of yours?" Ian smiled faintly and said, "This blood drinker is worth more than 100 merit points. This weapon was forged from the front teeth of a level 52-foot flat-toothed beast. When I exchanged for it, I spent 850 merit points." "So much?" Eugene was speechless. "What's so special about this sword? It can cut iron like mud? My saber seems to be able to do the same." Ruby rolled his eyes as he heard Eugene's ignorance. "What's the use of your broken sword? It can't cut through monsters that are above level 50. Cut iron like mud? What's the big deal about iron? The skin and scales of these monsters are many times harder than iron. Moreover, a broken knife like yours would break under the claws of these monsters. Do you know how hard it is?" Eugene heard him choke and was stunned for a moment before he came to a realization. Dean felt strange at his heart. Although Eugene was a newcomer, it seemed that he didn't know anything about the battles outside the giant wall. Had he never been outside the giant wall? "Captain," Eugene suddenly thought of something and asked curiously, "What are the first and second additional missions that person mentioned?" Ian held the reins and galloped through the wilderness. Without turning his head, he said, "The first and second additional missions are old missions. Almost every time we carry out a mission, these 2 additional missions are there. They are permanent missions. The first additional task is to find relics or ruins. As long as you provide clues or directly provide the coordinates of the ruins, then you will get a huge amount of merit points. The second task is to collect a plant called dragon grass. It is said that it is the dragon worm's favorite food. Each dragon grass can be exchanged for 10 merit points." Eugene was taken aback and asked, "A relic from the ancient era? What was a relic from an ancient era?" Are they the ruins outside the giant wall? Ian replied, Of course not. Those ruins have been scrapped. Even the copper and iron in the ruins have been corroded by the rain. What we are looking for are the remains of human corpses or items that haven't been damaged in the past. These ruins are generally sealed and hidden in the ground or in some mountains. Chapter 518. Dean, who was riding at the back of the team, was startled as he heard Ian's words. He remembered the news that he had seen on TV. At the beginning of the disaster, governments around the world built shelters at major city gates. Young women and children were the first to migrate into shelters. In addition to these women and children, there were also well-known intellectuals, writers, scientists, and famous university professors and other social celebrities. At that time, because of such classification and selection, it caused a lot of backlash from ordinary people. Some of them came out to lead the public opinion and accuse the government of unfair behavior. Under the guidance of these people, many people became disheartened and became thugs. They burned and looted. They created a lot of trouble, but were directly suppressed and killed by the armed police. At that time, the laws of various countries changed with the state of global war preparedness. Some of the people who made illegal comments on the network were directly targeted and killed. There was no room for maneuver. They weren't brought back for supervision and education as usual. These ancient-era ruins, are they referring to these shelters? Dean's eyes flashed. He still remembered the news broadcast on TV at that time. Many country shelters were directly destroyed because the construction was not hidden enough or because of some accident exposure. The remaining shelters were estimated to survive the final disaster. It was estimated that very few shelters could survive the final disaster. Although he did not know what happened in the end, he could tell from the world, after he woke up, that some of his father's words had come true. All the nuclear bombs in the world had been used. Otherwise, the sky today would not be covered by nuclear dust, and even the rain contained nuclear radiation. Moreover, he had been asleep for 300 years, although he was not sure how long it took for the nuclear disaster to break out after he fell asleep. But from the ruins of the buildings outside the giant wall, it could be seen that even if it wasn't 300 years, it wasn't far away. After such a long time, the nuclear dust still hadn't dissipated. The Earth's environment was still so bad. It could be seen how terrifying the number of nuclear bombs that exploded was. It was enough to blow up the entire Earth. If a nuclear bomb is triggered in the end, those who hid in the sanctuaries back then would not be able to escape death, Hansen said. Dean's thoughts drifted away. Staying in the shelters would mean death. They would starve to death. If they left the shelters, then the Earth wouldn't be suitable for survival. After so many years of recuperation plus the Earth's self-healing ability, the nuclear radiation in the air is still so strong. If it was 100 years ago, then the nuclear radiation outside could easily kill an adult. If these people survived, then there would be a continuation of civilization. Dean thought of the giant wall. There was a trace of thought in his mind. The giant wall was also a shelter. Moreover, it was more solid than the shelters he had seen on TV. It was not so much a shelter, but a defensive barrier. He couldn't confirm whether the barrier was built by the world government or by the survivors after the disaster. However, from the additional task of the Dragon Clan, it could be seen that the Dragon Clan was looking for the things of the old civilization. They wanted to get the fire of the old civilization. Only enough benefits can drive the actions of the people in power. Dean thought in his heart. If the Dragon Clan didn't taste the sweetness, then they would never issue such an additional task to every Dragon Clan guard. Thinking about this, Hansen suddenly felt an urge to find the shelter he had once lived in. He wanted to see what it was like inside and see the people who were wearing the same clothes as him. Eugene looked at Ian curiously. Will there be a lot of merit rewards if we find the ruins? Ian nodded. The reward is high, but the probability of completion is very small. It's like the probability of winning the grand prize. So don't have any expectations. If we can find it by chance, we'll be lucky. If we deliberately look for it, we'll probably have to stay in the barren area for 1.5 years and still not see it. Moreover, It's another matter whether we can survive there for that long. Eugene smiled and said, so it's all about luck in the outside world. Luck is the key, but not everyone has it. On the other side, Rosemary, who was dressed in tight-fitting black clothes that accentuated her curvaceous figure, said calmly, but strength is controllable, and it's more trustworthy. Martin, who was riding beside Ian, said, the giant wall is in front of us. Get ready. Luna chuckled, don't talk too much. It's one of the ways to save physical strength. Little Gold, you should learn from Little Dean. Eugene smiled. Don't call me Little Gold. It's weird, but I like gold. The light of gold is the most beautiful. Luna laughed. Eugene's eyes lit up as he heard Luna's words. Luna looked at him with a smile. If you can come back alive this time, this sister will accompany you to play. Hearing this, Eugene was slightly excited and said, just because of this, I will definitely be able to survive. It didn't take long for them to arrive in front of the towering giant wall. The dragon territory itself was located in a remote area. The dragon horse's speed was also very fast. After leaving the dragon territory, they directly entered the wilderness suburbs. At this moment, it only took them less than half an hour to reach the giant wall. Everyone stopped talking and laughed as they looked at the towering wall. The atmosphere of the team gradually became serious. There was a passage in front of the giant wall. There were 2 teams of knights wearing golden armors at the entrance of the passage. All of them were wearing dragon badges. Ian dismounted first and handed the reins to a knight. He showed his Dragon Guard medal to a middle-aged knight and said, we are the 7th Dragon Guard team. We are on a mission. Please open the door. The middle-aged man had expected it when he saw the dragon horse they were sitting on. He checked the medals of Dudian and the others. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he waved to the guard to open the door of the passage. Ian took the lead and went in. Martin, Ruby, Rosemary, and others followed behind him. After entering the underground tunnel, he passed through a long, dark corridor and arrived at the other end of the tunnel. As the door was pushed open, Dudian was surprised to find that there were dragon guards stationed at the entrance of the passage. But there were only 4 of them. Their armor was smeared with plant slurry for simple camouflage. Chapter 519. Dean looked back at the giant wall. According to the previous route, he was on the west side of the giant wall. He had to go straight to the left side to reach the outer wall area. At the intersection of the western corner and along the northern side of the giant wall was the giant wall passage. He could find Sergei there. I have to find a way to meet Sergei on the way back. Dean's eyes lit up. He wanted to continue the experiment of his new invention, but it wasn't feasible in the 9th region. He had to transport the materials outside the giant wall and establish a stronghold outside the giant wall to produce the new invention. Although some of the molds made before would be invalid, but he had the previous experience, so the time for the second production would be greatly shortened. Moreover, he was ready to secretly build an experimental factory in the slums if he continued to produce the new invention. He needed an open and secret place to produce the new invention. Now it seemed that the desolate area outside the giant wall was obviously more suitable than the slums. Moreover, he didn't need to worry about the harm caused by environmental pollution, which would attract the attention of other forces. Keep up. Shout your ability is thermal vision. If you sense any monsters, remember to warn us. Ian and Martin walked in front of the team with dignified expressions. From the moment they entered the giant wall, it meant that they were completely isolated from the safe environment. They could encounter danger at any time. Even if they were so close to the giant wall, they could still encounter extremely powerful monsters. Dean nodded as he came to the middle of the team. His pupils contracted as he observed the surroundings with thermal vision. During the 15-day preparation period, the members of the team exchanged their abilities. After all, everyone needed to cooperate with each other and perform their respective duties outside the giant wall to carry out the task. Dean's ability was thermal vision, so Ian positioned him as the auxiliary perceptor of the team. Eugene, who could toughen his skin, was in the role of combat and defense. Others were given different tasks according to their abilities. There is a monster at 3 o'clock direction, 4 miles ahead. There are 4 monsters at 3 o'clock direction. They seem to be sickle zombies. Dean reported the situation to the team. Ian asked in a low voice, "What is their general strength?" "Hunting level 20 to 25, Dean said. "Eugene, go and kill them," Ian ordered. Eugene was surprised. "Why?" Ian looked at him. "What do you mean, why?" Eugene scratched his head as he saw everyone looking at him. "Aren't you stronger than me? Why should I go alone?" What if Dean's perception is wrong? It's easy to deviate from judging the monster's physique by heat alone. "Just go." Martin, who had a cold temper, snorted. "If there's anything wrong with your perception, we'll support you immediately." But Eugene was reluctant. Ian frowned and said patiently, "Eugene, we need to conserve our strength before we enter the 3rd Orange Wasteland. You newbies can practice with some small monsters. If you're worried, you can go with Dew." Ian frowned and said patiently, "Eugene, we need to conserve our strength before we enter the 3rd Orange Wasteland." Hearing his words, Eugene hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he sighed and rushed over with his sword. Dean didn't follow. As Ian said, he also needed to conserve his physical strength. After all, the only thing he could rely on outside the giant wall was his own strength. After a moment, when Dean and others kept up with the same speed, Eugene's battle was over. Eugene's sword was back to its sheath, stained with blood. There were several corpses lying on the ground. As Dean had perceived, all of them were undeads with sickle arms. One of the undeads had a slightly protruding horn on its forehead. It seemed to be a mutated sickle undeads. "Let's go." Ian didn't stop. He continued to move along the route. Eugene returned to the team and silently followed. There was silence along the way. "Little Gold, I know what you were thinking." Luna leaned close to Eugene. "You don't have to worry about anything. Newcomer's physical strength is specialized in clearing obstacles. We will protect you when you run out of physical strength." Eugene looked at her and smiled bitterly. "I understand." Luna continued, "We won't abandon anyone. Even from the point of view of benefits, we don't want to do so. There's a rule that every time we lose a member, 10% of the medal reward will be deducted. So you don't have to worry about anything." "There's such a rule?" Eugene was surprised. It seems that the higher-ups are very thoughtful. Of course, even if they didn't think of it in the beginning, they would have thought of it after a few accidents. Luna chuckled. While the two were talking, Dean reported several locations where the monsters were hiding. Ian saw that the monsters in these locations were far away from their route. Their level wasn't high. All of them were level 30 or below, so he didn't ask Eugene to hunt them. Dean was observing the surrounding monsters while recording the route. Since the mission was dangerous, he naturally had to be prepared for the team to be annihilated. In case Ian and the others died, he would have to rely on himself to remember the route to return. As they gradually went deeper into the wilderness ruins, large sections of the city outline appeared in Dean's line of sight. Broken high-rise buildings, mosses and vines covered supermarkets, broken asphalt roads, and crash cars were scattered in the middle of the road. The street lights at the intersection had long been broken. They fell powerlessly on the street and were slowly eroded by dust and moss. There were footprints and puddles on the road. There were also black nuclei of snow. The melting speed of the black snow was relatively slow due to the cold wind. There were still thick layers of snow in many places. It looked quite gloomy and dark. "We will reach the Orange Wasteland after about 80 kilometers. Ian turned to Luna and said, "Do you still have your scent? Did you sense any large monsters?" Luna shook her head. "The smell is still there. It hasn't been destroyed." Ian nodded. He looked at Dean. "Report to me as soon as you sense any movement. Do you understand?" Dean nodded. He looked at Luna. Her ability was also a kind of perception ability, but it was different from simple perception. Her ability had the effect of luring enemies. Her body could secrete urine with a special smell. This urine could be used as a road sign to mark the area. It could also lure some high-level monsters. These monsters would mistake it for the smell of their favorite food. Once the smell was destroyed, it meant that there was a high-level monster. Of course, this was only one of Luna's abilities. Her speed was increased by her ability, so she couldn't be underestimated. She was far better than people with the same physique. In addition, her sense of smell was also very sensitive. It could be said that she was the trump card of this team. Take a break and replenish your physical strength. We will enter the wasteland soon. Ian said. Everyone stopped. Ruby put down the huge backpack on his back and untied it. He took out food and water from it and handed it to the people who came to collect it. His food was the priority, and the food in each person's backpack was the last supply. From the giant wall to here, they had been rushing for the whole morning. Although they had eaten before departure, but they had been in a state of tension along the way. Their bodies had consumed a lot of energy. They were a little hungry. Soon, everyone finished eating. It only took them less than 5 minutes to finish, and that included rest time. Chapter 520. Wait. Luna raised her hand as they were about 35 miles away from the wasteland. Everyone's heart trembled, and they stopped in their tracks. Ian turned his head to look at her with a serious expression. He asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "There's a smell of blood." Luna gently sniffed and frowned. "It's coming from the 10 o'clock direction. It should be the smell of human blood." "Human blood?" Everyone was shocked. Eugene whispered, "Is there another team in front?" "It's possible." Ian's eyes lit up. He looked at Luna. "Can you smell the smell of a monster?" "There's a damp and fishy smell. It should be left by a monster," Luna said. Ian pondered for a moment. "Let's go and take a look." Everyone looked at each other, but no one objected. They controlled their footsteps and sneaked towards the place that Luna had pointed out. Dean used thermal vision to carefully observe the surroundings. In addition to some mice and small monsters in the ruins, he didn't see any high-level monsters with dazzling heat. They arrived at the place that Luna had pointed out after more than 10 minutes. It was a wide square. Several towering buildings had collapsed, and only half of them were left standing. The windows of the buildings were broken and the concrete had faded. It looked like a shriveled skeleton. The place where the smell of blood came from was an open space on the side of the square. Everyone confirmed that the surrounding environment was safe. They quietly approached the place. They saw a young man lying on the ground. He was wearing the basic armor of the Dragon Guards. Only the lower half of his head was left. His eyes were gone from the nose bridge. His brain was scattered on the ground. There was a huge wound on his chest. Everyone's face slightly changed as they saw the tragic scene. Dean frowned. From the color of the blood and the softness of the brain, it could be seen that the person had died less than half an hour ago. In other words, he had died 20 minutes ago. He quickly looked around and immediately saw a few sharp claw marks on the ground. In addition, a few moss-covered cars had been overturned, and some had crashed into the walls of the square, leaving a few wet tire marks on the ground. Martin suddenly squatted down and looked at the dragon tattoo on a man's arm. He tore it open and saw the name embroidered on the back of the dragon tattoo. His expression changed, and he whispered, "It's Tommy, the quick blade of the 5th Squad." Ruby was surprised. "Tommy? How is this possible? He actually died here? This is not the Baron area." Ian looked at the body for a while, and then looked around. His eyes were vigilant and solemn. He said in a low voice, "He must have been chased by something from the wasteland. He couldn't shake it off, so he was killed." Luna looked at Dudian. "Did you see anything?" "No," Dudian replied. Luna said to Ian, "We can't stay here for long. We have to leave immediately." Ian nodded and looked at the corpse on the ground. He sighed and said, "Mary, burn his body. Don't leave it to those filthy monsters." "Yes." Rosemary took out kerosene from her pocket and was ready to light it. Dudian quickly said, "Don't." The others looked at him. Dudian said, "He died not long ago, so the monster shouldn't have gone far. If it is a cold-blooded monster, then I'm afraid that it will be stimulated if we light a fire here." Rosemary's face turned cold. "There are 7 of us here. Even if it appears we can deal with it. Moreover, we can help Tommy to get revenge. What are you afraid of?" Eugene said, "I think Dudian's words are reasonable. Although we can deal with a monster, but shouldn't we save our physical strength? Isn't it not cost-effective to waste our physical strength for such thing?" Rosemary opened her mouth to speak, but Ian raised his hand to stop her. There was a trace of complex color in his eyes. Dean is right. We shouldn't stay here for long. Let's go. Rosemary was startled as she looked at the corpse on the ground. She put away the kerosene in her hand and left with the team. Not long after the crowd left, two dark red lights slowly appeared in the shadow of a dilapidated building. The monster didn't eat Tommy, it just killed him. Tommy must have angered it, so it killed him to vent its anger. Martin analyzed to Ian in a low voice as they moved forward. His words were also heard by the rest of the team. Ian nodded with a serious look in his eyes. Generally, high-level demonic creatures are territorial and won't easily stray too far from their territory. However, this demonic creature chased him all the way here. This is very scary. Yes. Martin narrowed his eyes. It should be a monster that specializes in hunting other monsters. It has a weak territorial nature. Wherever there is food, that is its territory. I hope we won't meet it. Ian looked back at Dudian. Fortunately, you reacted quickly. Otherwise, we would have gotten into unnecessary trouble. Our losses would be very big. Dudian smiled as he saw Ian praise him, but his mood was dignified. He noticed that the impact of the battle wasn't big. It showed that the battle ended quickly. It showed that the monster that killed Tommy had the absolute power to crush Tommy, but let Tommy run out of the wasteland. It was very unusual. Dudian could only think of one possibility. That was that the monster used Tommy as a bait. During the chase, they wanted him to escape back to his territory so that they could capture him in one fell swoop. If that was the case, then it showed that the monster's IQ was very high. The only advantage that humans had over monsters was wisdom. If the monster's wisdom wasn't inferior to humans, then humans wouldn't have any capital to fight against monsters. It didn't take long for the team to reach the wasteland. Dean and Eugene wouldn't have known that they were in the wasteland if it wasn't for Ian's explanation. This wasteland was similar to the areas outside. It was still a desolate ruin, but it looked more dilapidated. Other than that, there was no difference. There were no boundaries or signs on the ground. There is the smell of worm powder here. The higher the level of the monster, the more afraid they are of the smell of worm powder. Ian explained to Dean and Eugene. Dean had heard of the godworm powder before. He gently sniffed and smelled a strange smell floating in the air. At first, it was very stinky, but after a while, he felt that the stench slowly became fragrant. In the end, the more he smelled, the more comfortable he felt, as if the pores of his whole body were relaxing. Suddenly, he felt some creeping movement and coldness from his left shoulder. It seemed that the ice blood was flowing gently in his left shoulder. Chapter 5:21. Since the advanced monsters are afraid of the worm powder, then why don't we carry some with us? Wouldn't we be able to avoid encountering advanced monsters? Eugene asked curiously. I'll tell you after we leave this place. Ian said in a dignified tone. Everyone get ready to move at full speed into the wasteland. Then he winked at Martin, and the two of them took the lead. They quickly crossed the border and entered the wasteland, moving forward in a straight line. Dean's eyes lit up as he followed them. He noticed that in the vicinity of the divine worm powder, there were quite a few red heat spots, especially in the soil, in the wreckage of the ruins, and in the dense grasses. Luna, Dean, report immediately if there is any situation, Ian said in a low voice. Luna and Dean nodded and followed behind them. They were in the middle of the team. Ruby, Rosemary, and Eugene were at the back of the team to protect Dean and Luna. In the wilderness, the team would focus on protecting the teammates who had good perception. There are monsters at 2:30 o'clock. There are monsters at 10 o'clock. On the way, Dean constantly reported the location of the monsters he would encounter along the way. As for the monsters that were farther away, there was no need to report them. In the blink of an eye, they had been in the wasteland for 7 or 8 minutes. Although they would occasionally encounter monsters, they would choose to take a detour, but they were still more than 30 kilometers away from the border. Ian and Martin led the team to reduce their speed. Their physical consumption was relatively large, so they needed to recover in time to maintain the best state. After slowing down, Ian took the time to answer Eugene's question. Although the divine worm powder can repel high-level monsters, it is a fatal temptation to ordinary monsters. Usually, a large number of ordinary monsters gather near the border. Of course, the ordinary monsters aren't the level 7 or 8 monsters that inhabit the green wasteland, but the ordinary monsters in our area. Eugene was startled for a moment before he understood. He rolled his eyes and said, "If that's the case, can't we use the divine worm powder as bait to make a trap to catch all these demonic creatures in one fell swoop? This way, the speed at which we clear out the monsters should be many times faster." Ian nodded and said, "The idea is good. Some people have thought about it, but it is very difficult to make a trap that can kill monsters above level 30. The materials needed are too many. The risk of transporting these materials from the giant wall is too great. Little Do should be clear about this. You're a hunter, so you should have learned how to make traps, right?" Dean replied, "Yes, if it's just to make traps to kill level 10 monsters, then using the resources in the wilderness, I can barely do it." The so-called trap was nothing more than using the destructive power of the surrounding environment to deal with the enemy. In this wilderness, if you want to make a trap, you can only dig a pit or throw a boulder. But such a trap will have a great impact on monsters above level 30. This is also the reason why the hunter profession is not popular among senior hunters. At the limitless level, the role of the hunter profession is reduced because of the environment and the monsters they encounter. They can only cooperate with teammates and sneak arrows from the back. They can't fight alone, and they don't have the ability to be the core of the team. Glenn was an archer at the beginning, but she successfully transformed into an assassin when she reached senior hunter level. Combined with her Black Weaver magic mark ability, she could ambush and assassinate. In the wilderness, she could often lead a team to survive. She could hunt monsters that were much stronger than her own physique. But Dean was still a traditional hunter. He used bow and arrow to fight. He was at a disadvantage in terms of weapons. The higher the physique of an archer was, the higher the requirements for the bow. After all, it wasn't about the accuracy, but the penetrating power of the arrow. Accuracy was the basic requirement for a limitless hunter. As for the penetrating power, it all depended on the bow. However, this was only the value of the traditional hunter in this world. Dean had already taken these factors into account when he chose the bow and arrow. For him, there were many ways to trap and kill level 30 monsters, or even higher. However, these methods were not suitable to be used in front of Ian and the others, as it was easy to expose his details. Moreover, Ian continued, the worm powder has always been managed by the top management. Even Deacon-level characters can't touch the worm powder, let alone ordinary dragon guards like us. Eugene was speechless. Since this thing is so precious, how much did they directly sprinkle it at the border? Isn't it too wasteful? Ian shrugged. Do you think that it is a waste to use resources to cast the giant wall? Hearing that, Eugene immediately understood. The boundary formed by the divine insect powder was like an invisible wall that blocked all high-level magical beasts. Therefore, no matter how much divine insect powder was spent, it wouldn't hurt. However, if it was given to people like them, it would be too extravagant. Captain, why don't we go back and secretly get some worm powder? Eugene's eyes turned. As long as we seal it up, then the smell won't leak. In case we encounter a high-level monster, we can use it. Wouldn't it be a free trump card? It's useless. Ian shook his head. Although the high-level monsters hate the smell of worm powder, but it doesn't mean that it can stop them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be monsters sneaking out of the wasteland. When we encountered a high-level magical creature and attracted its attention, even the smell of the divine worm powder wouldn't be able to dispel its desire to hunt us. It was just like how we hated dirty places filled with feces. But if there was gold and treasures in those places, would we still hate them? We will endure the disgust and pick out the things inside. Eugene was startled. He smiled bitterly and said, "Looks like I was happy for nothing. If you can think of it, others can too. No one is a fool." Martin, who was walking beside Ian, said coldly. Eugene smiled but didn't speak. "I left a mark in front of us. It disappeared," Luna suddenly said. Ian and Martin stopped in their tracks and turned to look at her. Ian asked, "How far is it?" about 20 miles in the direction of 11 o'clock. Luna frowned and shook her head. It may have been washed away by the rain. After all, I left the mark during the last mission. It was almost half a year ago. Ian's eyes were dignified. Don't be careless. Your mark won't be washed away by the rain. Luna asked, why don't we take a detour? Ian pondered for a moment as he looked around. They were surrounded by ruins of the city. They could see the outline of dark green mountains in the distance. The sky was foggy and the humidity was high. The Wind Listener is a rare monster in the Monster Illustrated book. Ian frowned. It has a keen hearing and is a rock attribute monster. It can drill into the earth and hide underground. According to the Monster Illustrated book, it likes to live in soft and humid areas. It likes to eat rotten things, including rotten plant leaves. But it likes rotten flesh and corpses the most. This area is the western part of the Third Orange Wasteland. It's also a rather humid area. It should be lurking somewhere around this ruined city. Martin nodded. It will be difficult for us to find it. We can only follow the old rules and let it come out to find us. But it is easy to attract other monsters with similar taste. Everyone get ready for battle. Ian nodded slightly and glanced at a tall building nearby. He immediately climbed up from the outside of the tall building. The tall building was covered with vines and looked as if it was supported by vines. He climbed to the top of the building and looked at it for a while. Then he returned downstairs and said to everyone, go to the west. The fog is thicker there. He took the lead and walked forward. Dean and Luna followed him and were responsible for guiding the way. Along the way, they avoided some scorching hot monsters. Occasionally, they encountered some undead or level 10 monsters. Ian led the team to kill them or shake them off. He didn't deliberately hunt them. Dean followed the team and experienced the work of the Dragon Guards. He suddenly understood why there were still so many monsters in the wasteland outside the giant wall. Now the reason was clear. The pioneers were only responsible for killing high-level monsters, and the Lemmeter was only responsible for hunting monsters. As for the rest of the monsters, they were too lazy to pay attention to them. It would waste unnecessary physical energy. In the end, these demonic creatures survived and multiplied more and more. Hey, when they passed the corner of the ruined street, they saw a monster pointed out by Dean. Ian was surprised when he saw its appearance. He turned and smiled. It is a rare monster in the growth period named cytoplasmic worm. Our luck is good. When they saw the monster, there was a trace of smile on their faces. A rare monster named parasitic soulworm could be exchanged for 200 medals. If it was a rare monster, it could be exchanged for 1,000 medals. Eugene, Dean, which one of you is going to kill it? Ian laughed. Hurry up. Don't let it run away. Eugene said excitedly, I'll go. Then he lifted his sword and rushed forward. This cytoplasmic being in its growth stage had a hunting level between 18 and 25. Its body was humanoid, but it had a few head-like sarcomas. Each sarcoma was covered with stinky mucus that oozed a pale, yellow liquid-like bile. Its sharp claws were uneven like tree branches, but they were very sharp. It stood crookedly, looking extremely terrifying. If it was a complete cytoplasmic worm, its hunting level would reach 57. It could easily kill a senior Lemmeter, but this one needed to go through 2 more transformations. Seeing Eugene pounce, the cytoplasmic worm opened its mouth and roared. The center of its abdomen cracked open with sharp teeth. Its body suddenly shot out to meet Eugene. Eugene was agile and easily dodged the cytoplasm being's frontal attack. As he brushed past the cytoplasm being, he swung his sword backhandedly and cut the cytoplasm being's body. Yellow blood spurted out and splashed on the back of his armor. He lowered his body and quickly stopped. He turned around and stabbed the cytoplasmic worm's body. Then he shook his arm and widened the wound. He quickly pulled out his sword and kicked the cytoplasmic worm. The cytoplasmic worm lost balance and leaned forward. At the same time, he quickly caught up and cut the sarcomas on its body. Before coming to the barren area, he had done a lot of homework. He memorized the monster atlas. He knew that the cytoplasmic worm's fatal weakness was these sarcomas. They could give birth to small cytoplasmic worms. This was a monster that reproduced monogamously. The battle ended quickly. Eugene was a junior Lemeter after all. He could fight a monster that was level 40. Although this named monster was stronger than ordinary monsters of the same level, its overall combat ability was only around level 30. A difference of 10 levels meant a crushing defeat. After killing the cytoplasmic worm, Eugene took out a parasitic soul worm from its blood and put it in a bottle in his backpack. Everyone would wear this special bottle to store parasitic soul worms before coming out. This was in case they were lucky enough to have something to store them in the future. Returning to the crowd, Eugene smiled. This little thing is quite agile. Ian smiled. Let's go. The smell of blood here is too heavy. We don't want to attract other monsters. Then he quickly led the team along the street. A long time after everyone left the street, the body of the cytoplasmic one lying in the middle of the street trembled slightly. Then, it seemed to be dragged by something into the darkness of the alley next to it. And then there was the sound of bones being chewed. After killing the cytoplasmic worm, Dean and the others met a lot of monsters. Most of them were undead. Occasionally, they met flying monsters. These flying monsters hovered in the sky. Occasionally, they would swoop down and pick up undead or unknown monsters from the ground. Then they would fly into the sky and disappear into the distance. The sky was getting dark. Ian stopped and led Dean and the others to a basement in the ruins. The area was covered with dust and cobwebs. There was also some dry and viscous slurry. It seemed to be the saliva and feces left by some monsters. Obviously, there used to be monsters living here, but from the traces of the dry mucus, it seemed that the monsters that lived here had left a long time ago. Deal with the blood on your body. Ian used a grass brush that was rolled up by the roadside vines to wipe the blood on his armor. Eugene, Rosemary, Martin, and others silently wiped the bloodstains on their armors. They knew that the danger outside the giant wall would gradually come. The longer they stayed in the giant wall, the more bloodstains they would get, the higher the chance of attracting high-level monsters. Chapter 522. The night was quiet. Ian arranged Ruby and Dean to be on duty so that the others could have a good rest and restore their physical strength in order to be in the best condition for tomorrow's battle. Give me the signal immediately if you sense any monster approaching, Ruby said to Dean. Dean nodded slightly. Both of them sat at opposite ends of the basement. They were always paying attention to the movements outside. There was no bonfire in the dark basement, as they didn't want the heat to attract the monsters. Eugene, Ian, and others were tightly wrapped in clothes. They were leaning against the wall and sleeping. They were holding weapons in their hands. It seemed that they would wake up at any time and enter the battle. Dean maintained the thermal vision state. He was paying attention to the movements of the monsters outside. He was also paying attention to the physical state of Ian and others. He could see the blood flow in their bodies and the contraction of their hearts. I have to find a way to leave the team and find Sergei after the mission is completed. Dean's eyes lit up as he secretly thought about the method. The night was long. From time to time, low roars of beasts and roars of monsters echoed from the street above the basement. Every time there was a sound, Dean and Ruby's heart would tighten, and their whole body would tense up. They would relax a little after the sound disappeared. The night passed in the blink of an eye. Dawn shined from the direction of the vents into the basement. Ruby saw that the sky was bright, so he woke up Ian and others. They had breakfast and packed up their things. Luna and Dean checked the movements outside to confirm that there were no monsters nearby. They quietly climbed out of the basement and went to the street outside. Let's go. Ian led the way. Everyone pulled out their weapons and followed behind him. He quietly walked along the street. Along the way, he saw some monster skeletons on the ground. In addition, he also encountered a pool of fresh blood. Dean recalled the roars of monsters he heard last night. He guessed that most of the blood was left from the battle at that time. On the quiet and desolate street, a few corpses were staggering. When they heard the footsteps of the crowd, they immediately turned their heads and looked over. Their numb faces were full of blood, and suddenly they showed a hideous expression. They roared and rushed over. Xiaodu, you're in charge of cleaning up. Eugene needs to conserve his strength for the battle against the silencers, Ian said. Dean nodded and pulled a white bone from the wreckage of a monster on the ground. He rushed out of the team and killed several undeads. The bone spear easily penetrated their skulls. The disparity in physical strength allowed Dean to quickly end the battle without causing much movement. After killing several undeads, Dean held the bone spear and continued to move forward. He didn't want to waste arrows in the face of monsters whose level was no more than 10. Although the arrows could be recovered, the sharpness would be worn out. Along the way, they encountered some undeads along the way, as well as monsters that were the size of wolves but had the head of mice. They were all killed by Dean. It's strange that these weak zombies are still alive in a place with so many high-level monsters, Eugene muttered as he walked. No one answered him. Ian and the others were vigilant. Although they had Luna and Dean, they didn't dare to take the situation lightly. Dean's heart was moved as he heard Eugene's words. He thought about the undead's powder sold by the hunters in the giant wall. It could suppress the smell of the body and avoid the monster's attacks. It seemed that only a small part of the monsters would attack the undeads. The rest of the monsters were indifferent to the undeads. Was it because of the small number of scavenging monsters? In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the foothills at the edge of the city. There were many uneven pits on the road leading to the mountain. It seemed that they were pierced by blunt weapons. They looked like footprints, but didn't have claws like footprints. Ian glanced at them and said, "Prepare to enter the mountain." The wind listeners have very sensitive senses and can hear even the slightest movement. Everyone, put on your shoes and control your breathing. Breathe according to the demon-devouring rat breathing technique of 3 shallow breaths and 1 deep breaths. He took out the cloth that he had prepared from his backpack. He bent down and wrapped the alloy boots on his feet. It was a great extent of noise reduction. As for the 3 shallow and 1 deep breathing method, it was a very common method of camouflage. It was specifically used to prevent the monsters with sensitive hearing. Dean and others also finished their preparations after Ian was done. They adjusted their breathing and quietly went into the mountains. A few hundred meters into the mountain, Dean saw a large number of red heat sources lurking in the deep grass of the mountain. But these heat sources weren't big, just some small monsters between level 3 to 18. They didn't pose a threat to the team. Nevertheless, Dean gestured to signal them. Ian nodded and continued to move forward. The wet fog of the morning shrouded the mountain. Dean and the others entered the mountain. The fog blocked the road in front of the foothills and hid their figures. They moved forward quietly. Suddenly, Luna's face changed. She raised her hand and made a signal. Roar. At the same time as she gave the signal, a giant black shadow suddenly jumped out from the grass, shrouded in a thin layer of mist, roaring and pouncing towards them. Everyone was shocked. Ian and Martin were the fastest to react. Eugene was scared by the black shadow. His face turned pale as he instinctively retreated. He shrank into the team to get a sense of security. With a clanging sound, sparks flew out from the friction. Ian's sharp sword slashed the giant black shadow's body and blocked its pouncing momentum. However, he also swayed a little and staggered 2 steps back, almost falling down. Martin immediately stood in front of him. His weapons were 2 black knives. He crossed them in front of him and stared at the black shadow. He didn't rush forward, but waited for the team to adjust. Rosemary and Ruby quickly stood in position. Ruby threw the huge baggage on her to the side, pulled out her battle axe, and stood on guard. She looked nervous. Dean was able to see the appearance of the black shadow. Its upper body was humanoid. It had a muscular chest, but its head was like an eagle's. It didn't have eyes. Its lower body was like a snake's tail. It had 2 strong arms. There were several sharp flat spurs on the outside of its arms. Chapter 5:23. Everyone's face changed as they heard Ian's words. They nervously glanced around as their hearts beat faster. Before coming here, everyone had looked through the information. According to the records in the Magical Creature Atlas, The wind silencers were a type of regional magical creature. They liked to use their nests as their territory. There were some magical creatures following them, and there were also guardians with similar living habits. The corpse pecker in front of them was one of the guardians of the wind silencers. Pecker was also a monster that was given a name. Moreover, it was a rare monster like the silencer. Pecker and the silencer were at the same stage. The pecker was willing to be the guardian of the silencer, mainly because of its living habits. The silencer would secrete a corrosive acid when it ate. It would make the prey rot quickly before eating. The corpse pecker was also a magical creature that loved to eat rotten meat. It was the so-called birds of a feather flock together. In addition to similar appetites, the silencer had a keen sense of hearing, and the pecker had a strong hunting ability. They were almost one of the best partners among the monsters. Martin licked his lips and whispered, "Ian, watch the surroundings. Don't let the silencers launch a sneak attack. Rosemary, Eugene, both of you cooperate with me to kill it. Newbie Dean, you support us with arrows. Also look around." Eugene's body trembled as he heard his name. Rosemary didn't hesitate to say yes. She stepped out of the team and stood next to Martin. She held her sword and was ready to support Martin. Ian took out his bow and aimed at the pecker. He was ready to support it at any time. Roar! After the pecker was repelled by Ian, the sharp bone spur on the side of its arm was chipped. With an angry roar, the pecker swung its thick tail and pounced on Martin and Mary as fast as the wind. Martin roared as his arms became a lot thicker. His skin turned red as he stamped his feet to meet the pecker. The ability of his magic marks was to increase his strength and heal himself. So even though he had just become a high-level frontiersman, in terms of pure strength, he was comparable to the limit of a high-level frontiersman. Moreover, his self-healing ability was extremely strong, which made his fighting style inclined to the side of not caring about his life. Martin's sword fiercely collided with the pecker's arm. The edge of the sword was caught by the bone spur on the pecker's arm. The corpse pecker growled and raised his other arm to smash the corpse pecker's head. Rosemary, who was coordinating from the side, immediately leaped up and stabbed at its armpit with a one-handed sword. She wanted to chop off its arm. The corpse pecker had to turn its arm down to parry the rapier, while its other hand swung to shake off Martin, who was trying to entangle it. Dean aimed the arrow at the corpse pecker's head. He wanted to find a weakness, but the corpse pecker's head was like an eagle's beak. It had a smooth black shell and no eyes or nose. The mouth was hidden under the black shell. It was almost impossible to shoot the arrow directly into its mouth unless he stood under its body and shot. He did not fire his arrow, but waited. According to the Monster Atlas, the size and height of the corpse pecker should only be in the mature stage, and its hunting level should be between 46 and 52. Eugene, what are you still standing there for? Ian, who was on high alert, couldn't help but roar when he saw Eugene standing there motionless. Eugene replied in a timid tone, "I don't dare to go." Ian's lungs almost exploded as he heard Eugene's words. "Bastard, what are you talking about? Do you think we can live if something happens to them? Hurry up." If it weren't for the fact that he had to be wary of the wind listeners who might be lying in ambush in the surroundings, he would have already charged forward with a saber. Eugene bitterly said, "The corpse pecker is around level 50. Even a senior limitless expert may not be able to deal with it. I'm just a junior limitless expert. Wouldn't it be suicide if I go up? Moreover, it will hinder Martin. It's better to stay here." Ian's hands trembled in anger as he saw Eugene's face. Eugene's performance was good, and he was very obedient. Ian didn't expect that Eugene would throw a tantrum in the face of a crisis. He gritted his teeth and glared at him fiercely, then said to Ruby beside him, "You go help." Ruby also angrily stared at Eugene. He held his axe and rushed forward. Dean was standing at the back of the team. He frowned as he heard Eugene and Ian's words. He looked at Eugene and raised his eyebrows. Eugene's heartbeat was smooth. It showed that he was very calm. He wasn't as flustered and scared as he showed on the surface. It meant that he did it on purpose. Dean narrowed his eyes as he thought of a possibility. Eugene seemed to be aware of Dean's thoughts. He looked back at Dean with a faint smile on his lips. However, there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. Bang! Ruby, who had just rushed forward, was hit in the chest by the corpse pecker's tail. He flew back and was caught by Luna. Ruby's face flushed red. He roared, raised his battle axe, and rushed forward again. Dean knew that Ruby's magic mark ability wasn't a combat-type ability. It was a survival-type ability. He could absorb leaves and other non-toxic plants as food to maintain his vitality. Moreover, he could store enough nutrients in his body in advance. He could consume a part of it every day. It was similar to how cold-blooded snakes went into hibernation. He could store food in advance for months in advance. If it was a competition of endurance and energy consumption, he was the undisputed king of the team. But he was slightly weaker in a head-on fight. The corpse pecker's lower body twisted while its upper body swayed from side to side. It was hard to predict its movements. It waved its arms and rushed towards Martin. Through its body's sensitivity to heat, it realized that the one in front of it was the most threatening among the group of prey. Martin clenched his teeth as he waved his sword to block the bone spikes on the corpse pecker's arm. If it was an ordinary steel sword, it would have broken by now. Whoosh! Suddenly, Rosemary, who was next to her, twisted her body and rushed over in an extremely strange posture. The rapier in her hand stabbed silently into one of the corpse pecker's arms. The corpse pecker did not have any scales on its upper body. Instead, it had grayish-white skin similar to a human's. Rosemary's rapier pierced through the corpse pecker's body, and as she pulled out the arrow, blood spurted out. Ian's eyes lit up as he saw Rosemary hit the corpse pecker. Martin, pin it down and wait for the green poison to attack. Chapter 5:24. Whoosh! The pecker screamed and quickly twisted its body. Its strong upper body was like a terrifying shadow as it approached Martin. Its thick arms were waving fast like a shadow. Martin's pupils shrank as he waved his sword to parry. Suddenly, he felt a pain in his chest. He quickly retreated. His muscles tightened. He felt a chill as if the god of death had gently stroked his head. Ian saw that Martin couldn't contain the angry pecker, so he quickly said, "Rosemary, use the rope to tie it up." Rosemary didn't wait for his order. She had already taken out an iron-black chain out of nowhere. Her body suddenly rushed forward, and her hands and feet approached in a very strange posture. She threw the chain over the corpse pecker's head and shouted to Ruby on the other side, "Catch it." Seeing the opportunity, Ruby clenched his teeth and rushed out, grabbing the rope that was wrapped around the corpse pecker's neck. He stomped his feet on the ground and pulled the chain with all his might. The veins on his arms bulged. Dean saw the opportunity. He didn't wait for Ian to open his mouth. His wrist shook, and the arrow broke through the air. Whoosh! The arrow whistled through the air. By the time it whistled through the air, the arrow had already struck the corpse pecker's head like a black shadow. Bang! The arrowhead exploded. The lead that was poured into the arrowhead splashed and slowly fell down the pecker's smooth head. It didn't penetrate the black carapace of the pecker's head. Dean frowned. The hardness of the pecker's carapace was beyond his expectation. The first arrow was ineffective, so Dean put another arrow. The pecker didn't wait for the second shot. It roared and twisted its body. Its arms were several times thicker than a human's. It grabbed the chain around its neck and pulled it. Rosemary and Ruby at both ends of the chain lost their balance. They almost stumbled and fell down. Martin saw the opportunity and rushed forward with his sword. Roar! The corpse pecker roared and swung the chain in its hand, smashing it down on Martin's head. Martin's face slightly changed. He raised his sword to block the attack. Bang! The pecker's fist hit the sword. The sword was slightly dented and seemed to break. Martin's feet sank into the ground. His knees were slightly bent. He almost knelt down. Ian and the others who witnessed this scene from behind were shocked. They didn't expect the corpse pecker to be so powerful. It was beyond their expectations. Ian slightly clenched his teeth, feeling both nervous and a little fearful. He looked around at the thick bushes around him, but unfortunately, his vision was blocked. He couldn't look down from the sky. so he couldn't confirm where the wind listeners were hiding. If the wind listeners also made a move at this moment, then the situation would be extremely terrible. When he hesitated and was about to announce a retreat, Ruby, who had fallen a few meters away from the corpse pecker, suddenly roared. There seemed to be a faint purplish-black color on his dark skin, and the blood vessels all over his body bulged, including his face. It looked like countless purplish-black earthworms and poisonous snakes were crawling all over his body. It was extremely terrifying. Ian's face changed as he saw the changes. Before he could finish his words, Ruby roared and suddenly stood up. He raised his giant axe and slashed at the corpse pecker fiercely. Dean, who was standing behind Ruby, was ready to shoot the second arrow to pin down the pecker. He felt that his sight was occupied by a ball of flame. At this moment, Ruby's body was exuding a terrible heat. Even Martin and Ian, who were the strongest in the team, couldn't compare to half of the heat he was exuding. The corpse pecker seemed to have sensed the danger as well. It turned its head to look and immediately faced Ruby's giant axe. Whoosh! The pecker waved its arm to attack. With a puff, dark red blood spurted out, and the corpse pecker instantly lost its balance. It seemed to be stunned for a moment, and when it looked down, its arm was gone. With a thud, an arm fell from the sky like a parabola and rolled on the withered weeds on the ground. Martin and Rosemary saw the opportunity. They didn't stay in a daze. Instead, they roared and rushed forward. Corpse Pecker reacted quickly and twisted its body to dodge Martin's sword. However, it was unable to dodge Rosemary's sword attack. Rosemary's sword left a shallow cut on its back. Although the cut was light and the damage was minimal, the wound quickly corroded like boiling water. Whoosh! Dean aimed at the opportunity and shot the second arrow. The arrow whistled as it reached the extreme speed of the bow. With a thud, the arrow flew toward the corpse pecker's broken arm, which it was trying to dodge. It hit its target at an extremely tricky angle and pierced through its broken arm. The pecker screamed in pain. It angrily waved its remaining arm to repel Martin. At the same time, it twisted its body and drilled into the deep grass to escape. Want to leave? A cold light flashed in Rosemary's eyes, and she quickly swung the chain. Her body was light and agile, and the chain danced like a living creature as it swept past the corpse pecker's neck. At the same time, it wrapped around the corpse pecker's broken arm. On the other side, Ruby saw an opportunity. He roared and pounced forward. His sturdy arms tightly grasped the chain. He stomped his feet on the ground and pulled the chain back fiercely. The corpse pecker was suddenly pulled backward. Puff! Martin, who had rushed from behind, stabbed the corpse pecker with his saber. The saber pierced through the corpse pecker's back. The tip of the saber was exposed on the corpse pecker's chest, and blood immediately oozed out. Martin kicked the pecker's back and quickly pulled out his sword to prevent the pecker from counterattacking. Blood slowly flowed from the black carapace on the corpse pecker's head. Its body writhed, trying to break free from the chains, but its strength was exhausted. Soon, it slowly fell to the ground, twitching slightly, its snake tail swinging unconsciously. Seeing that they had finally killed it, Martin and the others heaved a sigh of relief and gasped for breath in exhaustion. Ian looked around vigilantly. Don't relax. Pay attention to the surroundings. Upon hearing his words, Martin and the rest, who had relaxed earlier, suddenly felt their hearts tighten. They immediately gripped their weapons tightly. The three of them stood back to back and returned to the group. They nervously looked at the thick bushes around them, guarding against the wind listeners who might rush out at any time. The grass rustled in the breeze. It seemed that there were countless monsters hiding in it. No one dared to breathe loudly. After a while, the corpse pecker on the ground was completely dead. Its blood flowed all over the ground, and its tail gradually stopped twitching. Luna whispered, Captain, the silencer isn't here. There are no monsters around. Ian said, I didn't see any shadow of a monster. Ian nodded. Deal with the corpse and collect the parasitic soul worms. Get ready to go to the silencer's cave. Yes. Rosemary pulled out the dagger and went forward to collect the parasitic soul worms from the pecker's body. Martin helped Ruby. Are you okay? Ruby's face was pale. He forced a smile. I'm fine. Dean noticed that his hands were trembling. He frowned. What did you just do? Ian said in a low voice. Although Ruby's ability is survival type, he can quickly digest and absorb the stored food in his body during a battle and turn it into a powerful short-term burst of power. However, this is a huge burden on his body, so he can't use it too much. Ian looked at Eugene, who was next to him. At this time, Ian, Luna, and others' eyes fell on Eugene. Eugene bitterly said, Captain, I didn't mean it. Ian looked at him coldly and said, Do you want to kill all of us? Eugene quickly replied, How could I? I wouldn't be able to live if something happened to you. It's good that you know this. Martin continued. His gaze was sharp as he stared into Eugene's eyes. If this happens again, even if I don't kill the monster, I will be the first to retreat and kill you. Eugene smiled. I won't dare to do it again. Ian gave him a deep look. He wasn't interested in talking anymore. Seeing Rosemary put away Corpse Pecker's parasitic soulworm, he immediately said, Prepare to go. The Wind Listener's cave should be nearby. He patted Dian's shoulder. You did a good job. The arrows were very accurate. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.